Okay. I will now call to order this regular meeting of the Winooski City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Jim Duncan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, next is agenda review. We have heard that our auditor will not be able to make it this evening. Would someone like to make a motion to table item D?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Any other agenda review items? All right. It's time for public comment. Any public comment back there? All right. There's no one attending on Zoom either. So we will move to council reports. Aurora, can I start with you?
Sure. I don't have anything very specific to report. This Wednesday morning, though, is the second in-person meeting of Ideal Vermont, which I will be attending along with Inclusion and Belonging Chair Parker Silver.
Excellent.
The Infrastructure Commission met this past Thursday. We elected new officers. So Brian Bora will be chair. Michelle Metzler will be vice chair. Jason will be continuing on. He has been serving as the chair this past year. It's been really valuable to have him after transitioning from Laura Deligalecki after 7 years in that role. So it's been tough shoes to fill. So he's staying on as secretary. And then in the meeting, we just had a lot of discussion around work plan for the remainder of this fiscal year. And a lot of questions around capital projects. So it was mainly the chunk of it. We'll meet again on February 16th.
All right, thank you. I just want to express our heartfelt thanks to Janet Berard for 32 years of service as the Deputy City Clerk. I don't know if she's watching this somewhere. I'll also tell her this in person, but she will be leaving our service in, I think, before the next meeting. Just wanted to acknowledge the decades of good work that she has done for the city. She will be missed. Jim?
Thank you. My updates today involve the Airport Commission and the Housing Commission. So the Airport Commission met on Wednesday and discussed a number of capital projects that are underway. Of note to that might be of particular interest to this municipality, to the city, is that the noise exposure noise exposure mapping update is about to restart for the next round. I know that we have additional presence data for F-35, so they'll be reconvening the advisory group, including the original membership, or at least invitations out to original membership sometime in the next couple weeks. So that'll be a process starting up. The other piece that the Airport Commission reviewed was recent noise complaints from the airport's noise monitoring system. So as a reminder, residents can submit comments through the airport's noise monitoring system, and those can be tied to specific plane tracks. It's particularly useful for commercial flights. The commission, or the staff support for the commission, did note that they have not been able to get useful data from the Air Guard on complaints around F-35 flights, which is the group that normally takes in those complaints. So there's no real way to overlay the noise complaint data from military flights with the civilian flights. So the numbers reported in the complaint monitoring system are not really representative of the F-35 flights, primarily just the civilian flights. The Housing Commission had a extra long meeting on Thursday where we talked primarily about our housing chapter ordinance, chapter 9, and we received a number of staff updates and a lot of discussion around some changes proposed to that ordinance that would, first of all, would define short-term rentals. It's a term that has not been defined in our ordinances previously, so that'll be useful for future discussions around if and how to consider short-term rentals in the city. It focused on, we talked about trash again. It's a common topic for the Housing Commission during these quality of life and health and safety questions in housing ordinances. specifically talking about what type of rubbish clearing constitutes a violation of the ordinance, and also adding enforceability to the ordinance so that if there is rubbish accumulation, whether it's on the owner or on the occupant or the manager or whoever the responsible party is, that it gives code enforcement the ability to actually write a ticket for that violation, which currently is missing. And some more definition on the types of things that count as rubbish, such as broken appliances or couches left out in yards. We probably spent the most time talking about minimum room size, and I'm sorry to spend some time in these, but we did talk about it quite a bit, and I think it's worth alerting this group to the fact that our current ordinances define certain minimum area requirements for housing people, and when the number of people exceeds that space, the code enforcement is kind of left in a pickle. So discussing these minimum room sizes and additional sleeping areas is really something that we should be paying attention to as this ordinance is rewritten, because we know we have limited supply of housing, but when you have overcrowding, it creates a life safety risk. So we need to be balancing these as a community. So there'll be more discussion on that. Finally, the commission did discuss the fact sheet around the Just Cause eviction charter change petition, and I'll save findings from that for our item later in the agenda. Sorry for the long report, but thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thomas?
Excuse me, downtown Winooski met last Wednesday, and the majority of the meeting was Eric, who came and presented the sidewalk changes. I think it was a very fruitful meeting. I don't know if you're sharing that graph tonight, Eric. Okay. But I think Eric's going to talk about that later, so I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Well, let's move to city updates. Elaine?
Yes. So as you know, we're continuing the fiscal year 2024 budget meetings tonight with the final budget vote by council on what will be presented to the voters. Be sure to keep an eye out for our official town meeting day announcements, which will include all of the budget, meeting, and election information that you need. We will have a joint budget presentation on community dinner with the Winooski School District, sponsored by the Winooski Partnership for Prevention, on February 9th at the O'Brien Community Center, and the annual town meeting day presentation at the Winooski School District on March 6th. If you have questions, feel free to call or email 655-6410 to City Hall, or you can email budget@winooskibt.gov. You can also reach out to any city councilor or staff by visiting winooskibt.gov/contact. If you're interested in running for a local office on town meeting day, the deadline is coming up. That's to file paperwork 5 p.m. on Monday, January 30. There are 2 city council seats up for election and 3 school district seats up for election. The 2 city council seats are for 2-year terms. The school district seats are the treasurer for a 3-year term, and 2 school district trustee seats, one for a 3-year term and the other for a 2-year term. To appear on the ballot, you must be a Winooski resident and file a consent of candidate form and a petition with a minimum of 30 signatures to the city clerk's office, again by 5 p.m. January 30. If you have any questions about this process, please do contact the city clerk's office, again at 655-6410, clerk@winooskibt.gov, or come into City Hall at 27 West Allen Street, 7:30 to 4:30 each day, Monday through Friday. As a reminder, the Vermont Department of Health will be closing all state-run walk-in vaccination clinics by January 31st. Local health offices will continue to help vaccinate anyone who does not have a primary care provider or a local pharmacy accessible. If you need COVID-19 test kits, they are available for free at City Hall, at the city's library, and the senior center during regular hours. And finally, the city of Winooski was sent a press release today by the Vermont Air National Guard. They will be performing night flying from Tuesday, January 17 to Friday, January 20, and from Tuesday, January 24 to Friday, I'm sorry, this is a little bit dated, so it would be tomorrow, January 24th through January 27th is what's now going into the future, with 2 takeoff and landing periods scheduled between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. There are no scheduled morning flights. Their press release was shared on our city channels.
Thank you, Elaine. I mistakenly skipped the consent agenda. We have council minutes from January 17th and accounts payable warrant from January 19th. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. We are on to regular items. First up is on for discussion the public hearing to receive comment on the proposed FY24 budget and capital plan. Do you want to do a brief intro, Elaine?
Yes. So on December 5th, 2022, the city manager, that's me, presented an overview of the FY24 proposed budget to city council. Since that meeting, council has received presentations from each department, and they discussed cuts and adds at the January 17th meeting and approved on a 4-to-1 vote the following adjustments to the city manager's recommended budget: increasing the housing initiative director from 30 to 40 hours per week, maintaining the youth interventionist at 28 hours per week, including a mediated community voice or engagement funds for mediated community voice or engagement at $8,000, reducing supplies budget for recreation programs by $4,000, and removing the second library circulation assistant. For this combined is an FY24 proposed general fund budget total of $9,242,032.87, which would constitute an estimated 5.09% tax rate increase over FY23, the current year that we're in.
Okay. So, a public hearing. Did we notice this already?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. A public hearing has been noticed for the consideration of the FY24 proposed general fund budget. At this time, I would like to open the public hearing. Is there any public comment in the room tonight? Okay. I see there is a raised hand in Zoom. Paul, please bring Indra over.
Indra, whenever you're ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome, Indra.
Hey, so I was here before and I am here again, and I don't think the reason is unclear to y'all. Before I begin saying anything that I have to say, I just want y'all to kind of go on an imaginary journey of there is a city that's the most diverse in the entire state, talks about being diverse and takes pride in that, but also recognizes either through equity audit or through shared experience from BIPOC members of the community that racism is prevalent in the community, be it in the school system, be it at the local government level. And when there is a time to decide on the funding, despite all those big talks about equity and whatnot, the first item to cut is racial equity director. And the spending from the budget of millions of dollars is $8,000 on racial equity. If you were to hear that, not as a city council member of Winooski, but rather as a, regular human being, how would you feel? That is something very concerning to me. And in the last meeting, Elaine talked about a program, and I am happy to say that I met with Elaine, and I've said this very clearly that in terms of doing the equity work with the city of Winooski, I am happy to give my labor. I'm driving right now, but I'm happy to chat because I really do see the future, but when I see the reluctance and the hesitation to spend the money, despite all this talk about equity, I am really frustrated. I am frustrated, and it's not only me. I was gonna read a lot of letters, Facebook messages, text messages that I've gotten from people. They cannot come to the meeting because it's Monday at 6 p.m. and there is a black woman in the community who's we used to be her home for 15 years, and she was like, I would really love to show up. And in her words, I'm not gonna censor myself, it is fucked up that they're not prioritizing equity, and she can't show up to the meeting because it's Monday evening. So I don't know what is left to be done. Y'all have heard about this, and I am pretty aware that you understand the importance of this work, but I just didn't understand, $8,000 out of the city government budget, where a racial equity director could not even stay in the position for too long. I don't know what's going on in your mind. Do something about it, please. If we want to talk about the diversity being a big thing for the city of Winooski, if we want to continue writing that in every single statement that we write, spend some money. Our budget speaks value, and in the budget proposed $8,000 for racial equity, it really didn't show me that racial equity. And that is a disservice to a lot of people, including I, who has suffered at the racism of the city of Winooski. I have suffered, and it's documented out there. So please do something about it. That's all I have to say. I hope y'all, put action into the things that y'all say. I know there is, goodwill in nature. I know the times are really tough. I work in organizations. I support local governments, and I know that in the budgeting process, what we do is we ask, what is urgent and what is the most important thing for our city? That's the first question everybody asks in budgeting process. And if racial equity, if racial justice is not a top priority for Winooski, and if you're, just say it out loud. Just say it out loud. It did not fall under the most urgent and most important category, therefore we are not keeping it. If you can say that out publicly, it will help us see where your values are. But don't play the game of, we care about equity, diversity, the most diverse, and at the end, when it comes to spending the money, y'all are not willing to put the money. So I can be frustrated and share all the things that I have to say, share, but I think y'all know all of this already, and I've spoken before. So please do the right thing. It's not for you, it's not for me, it's for the city of Winooski. And when you walk on the street, you see the real need for us to do that work. So I hope y'all consider that and take necessary action. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. I do want to share that we've had this discussion. The $8,000 for the engagement program and the money for interpretation are not the only investments that we see ourselves making towards racial justice. I don't have the numbers offhand, but the additional time that we're funding for childcare, the youth interventionist position, recreation assistant, and admin and outreach coordinator are all tied to the ability to deliver the services we already do with more focus on equity. These previously grant-funded roles have created more accessibility to local government for the community. So we have prioritized retaining those, as well as the funding for the Housing Initiative Director to address concerns, one of the primary concerns coming from the equity audit. So I understand the position or the feelings around the equity director role. But I believe that the thinking coming from staff and some members of council is that we are still prioritizing this, but in different ways, more related to direct service potentially than having a strategic director role, which we do hope to bring back in the future. It is not permanently cut.
I don't want to take over a lot of time, but I have seen this discussion happen nationally. We are happy to add this program, that program, make equity be an issue, but when it comes to naming a particular position, a particular program, focus on BIPOC people who have historically suffered at the hands of and the lack of action from the city of Winooski in many state government. It's we don't want to do that, but there will be a program that will increase equity, all of that. I'm not saying it won't increase equity, but let's name it. Racial inequity is a problem in the city of Winooski. If y'all want to have a conversation about it, whether or not that's true, happy to. Let's open up the audit report, but that is the specific problem. Let's name it. I have seen it at a national level. We'll do the farm bill, we'll do this, we'll do the community service, and at the end, let's name the people who are the most marginalized, and that's where we go, oh, we can't do that. So, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I think I made my point clear, so thank you.
Thank you, Indra. Okay, I don't see any other public.
Yeah, can I read a letter that came in from the NAACP to members of council?
Sure, it's a little duplicative, but go ahead.
So, I think it's important to recognize that we're getting these comments from many different areas. So, just for those who might not know, the NAACP stands for National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. They sent a brief letter today just voicing their concern. It reads, Dear Winooski City Councilors, the Vermont branch of the NAACP are disappointed and surprised to hear that the city has decided not to keep the racial justice director position, primarily due to the large volume of BIPOC people living in the area. The city's decision to allocate only $8,000 towards racial equity initiatives is more than reprehensible when the city has a millions of dollar budget. As city officials, it is vital that you make time for and prioritize what you care about. If this budget is a reflection or a manifestation of your values, then we indeed are worried for the citizens of Winooski's ability to have an unbiased voice representing them at the table. We hope that you strategically think about and then reconsider this decision. We look forward to being in touch soon.
Thank you. All right, so seeing no additional comment, I will close the public hearing. And we will move to item B, which is discussion or approval of the FY24 general fund budget and capital plan to present to voters. Okay. This is essentially just, are we ready to vote on what we voted on last week and move that forward? Are there additional questions, thoughts, comments?
I do have some things that I would like to put forward. The first is, and I believe this is the most appropriate part of our agenda to address these items. I would like to make a motion to include the equity director and its salary as a separate budgetary item on the ballot.
There's a motion on the table.
Or would you be accepting of alteration to that motion?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I agree with what Christine had said what the mayor had said last week about not wanting to put individual positions on the voters on town meeting day, but I wonder if instead we could put the principle of equity and what that would cost the city on the budget. Oh, sorry, I can't talk. On the vote instead. So say allotting a certain amount of money that would be used to pay for the equity director and any other equity programs that the city were to engage in. And then we wouldn't be voting for just one position, but the ethos of what we're looking to get.
I have similar concerns about piecemealing the budget for voters. You know, all we're allowed to put on the ballot is a total number of dollars. And if we're not willing to do our work of presenting a budget that meets priorities and is still fiscally responsible, I don't think when you go into the ballot and see those total dollars, if you aren't following along, it's really hard to know how that's going to impact you.
However, we are going to be discussing and presenting the budget where we can discuss those items. I'm concerned that, especially with your example last time, Mayor Lott, that was kind of a false equivalency, and it's not taking into account this. You know, we've acknowledged that this is a very, very difficult budget year. That is something that we've talked about in detail, and what I see is we are proposing to cut a very important position that many residents feel the city needs. We are also acknowledging that we don't want to raise taxes in a way that would be too inequitable as well. So acknowledging that, especially because the model of taxation, property taxes used, isn't income sensitive. So acknowledging that that in itself does have an equity component. It's for that reason that recognizing kind of these two items of the city needs to provide the residents what it needs, with also the city not wanting to burden the residents in a way. I feel like that makes it appropriate to put this to the ballot. I think, you know, maybe that's not the way we've always done it, but, you know, that's an excuse for a lot. So I personally see that I don't feel comfortable supporting the budget as it currently stands, because I don't think it prioritizes equity in the way that you believe it does. We got from, last time we got unfunded needs from the staff. That didn't include a lot of the unfunded needs that fall under equity, including items like how our current zoning has contributed to racial and economic segregation in the city that has been documented as part of the equity audit, as well as like the issues of public transportation, how best to support Winooski's aging population, the language access plan. We have a lot of and underfunded equity needs. And if we're not, I'm just asking us to prioritize those in the same way. We're prioritizing and keeping in mind other unfunded needs. So I appreciate and like the framing that Councilor Renner has proposed, which if you don't feel comfortable asking for a specific position, an amount might be a better solution.
For me, it has the same problem.
I would struggle with what goes into how we would describe the existing commitment of this budget to equity. I consider, of the things that you've listed, I don't see any of those being solved by having an equity director. And the things that we are investing in, like sidewalks and non first come first serve electronic registration for community programming and after school, like those are things that actually address some of those very issues. And in terms of access to services in the city for seniors, or serving our kids who are majority, not like who who come from a school district where the majority of people speak another language aside from English. Like that's a huge investment. So how do we quantify that? And the answer is we won't be able to. We can provide an estimate. So the question would be, we're already putting this much in. Do we do more? And how do we rank that against the things that we would take? Well, I just don't know how you would frame that in a way that gives the voters in ballot language clear picture of what's already being invested in equity and solving some of these direct equity challenges, and have them weight that against a position. Or I don't even know what the additional body of work is that hasn't been defined, that's completely isolated from the existing equity investments we're already making. So I think if there's a way to frame that question about what is our relative, like, is equity a thing that this community is committed to? I guess I don't feel like I need the voters to tell me that's already true. And I don't think that we need a number, because we couldn't put it in the budget anyways. It could provide direction to the next round, but I don't see that putting a number in it is, I think, problematic in a number of ways. Calling the question of principle, I think, is important. It would be interesting to know, but I don't think it would change my perception of the community's needs, which is to focus on equity, and I feel like this budget does that.
I can understand that. However, kind of what I'm hearing is we know there are these needs, but we're not going to put money aside to figure out how to address them. Like, some of that is the thing, is like, we need to figure out how to address them. The way this budget is presented is, we are addressing some needs, but we don't feel we want to advance and increase our equity work. So we're going to deprioritize it in this budget, acknowledging that, yes, these questions will come up again next budget season. But if we are not, what we're saying is we're not going to think about equity in the way that it needs to be thought about. We're not going to put funds aside that we can then, if we're not comfortable doing an equity director position, that we can then explore other alternatives, like maybe increasing or exploring a more robust way to have that community outreach plan that takes into account that people aren't going to come to us. We need contractors and to pay leaders in the community to reach out to community members who are disenfranchised, who don't trust the government or don't quite understand what we do, to explain that before they can then come to the table as members of the community that are underrepresented and present what they need or comment on what the city is doing and how that affects them. So while I can acknowledge that maybe the equity director position at this time isn't the best way to go, I also don't think saying we're not going to set aside any money to do this work, whether it's contract work, whether it's paying community members, whether it's doing additional translation work, additional outreach, it just doesn't sit right with me.
We're setting aside money for that
Yeah,
in this budget.
multiple ways.
For
Yeah.
in a way that I don't think, my fear is that, you know, we set aside it in a way that isn't truly meaningful, and then if these funds aren't used because we haven't done the work to actually make things accessible and address the key kind of foundational equity issues, then they aren't going to be used, and then there's going to be this argument of like, oh, these aren't needed because they weren't used. And it's like, no, they weren't needed because we didn't set aside the resources and the time and the funds to do them correctly.
However, one example is there are stipends available for inclusion and belonging, and not all of those funds are even being utilized that are being offered, because that's a choice of the commissioner. So there's also that component where funds are available and they're not going unutilized because we're not working at ensuring that they're available, but there's a decision that folks can utilize that if they choose to or not. So there's it's not entirely one or the other. There's that realm of in between too.
Well, you can't, see, here's the thing, you can't argue that we can't use one-time funds for this work, but then also argue that, oh, we have funds that are one-time funds to do this work. What I am asking is to put equity on the budget in the general fund to fund it going forward in this particular case. I can appreciate and understand why council has those concerns. However, I would like to continue to highlight that I don't think it's enough, and it's not quite doing what we hope it is doing.
We're adding funds to do exactly community engagement and accessibility. We have a recommendation from staff for how much to include now as a pilot. We're first doing it. If it's not enough, we will use reserves. Staff come to us for reserve requests in that case. And then next year when we see how it plays out, if it needs more money, we can put more money in.
The other thing, I really would wish that these conversations could separate between doing our equity work and the equity director position, because I think as the comments that we've received today show, there's a miseducation of the people who are going to be voting on this item, or there's going to be confusion that we're only putting in $8,000 or $2,000 or $10,000, but we're putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars into equity work through this budget. And to say that we're not doing our equity work by not having a director is to say, like, if we didn't have a communications director, that we aren't doing communications. We would still be doing those things, but we aren't doing both. And I think that we got to be clear with the community that, like, equity work and equity director are not the same, and we're doing a lot, and this budget does a lot. It's a huge investment in changing in institutionalizing something that we haven't done before, except through grants. And so I guess I'm just urging us to use language that's pretty clear about what we're doing, because when I hear someone say, oh, you're only investing $10,000 in equity, you're giving up on this, that's just not right. And I think that we're going to have a challenging community discussion if we can't even talk about the same thing. And I think it's really, so in this conversation too, as we consider this motion and the potential change that's been proposed, let's talk about the difference between equity work and an equity director to oversee that work.
I am concerned that you're not understanding exactly what equity work is. Like, I acknowledge that we put...
I would actually ask you not to tell me what I do or don't
Okay.
understand. You can state what you think, but please don't state what I think.
Fair enough. My apologies. Okay.
I mean, I think there's something to be said for the fact that I do agree we have put a lot of money into the budget that is going to benefit equity work and creates equity work, but the fact that so many community members do not feel that we have done that, we're clearly not communicating very well at all. And that's not on any one individual, but a lot of what we do is perception of the community. And if the community doesn't feel that we're doing equity work, that does say something. Whether we are or we're not, that does say something.
I mean, it might also say that we're doing not enough equity work, and this residents are still experiencing amount of harm that it's really hard to put monetary value to. And I understand that, we live in a society and we can only work on this with the funds available. However, it's really hard to, as a body, say that we're going to fund work that, yes, is meeting some needs and is addressing some harm that has existed, but we're not going to address all of it. And acknowledging that harm will continue to happen. And I want to prioritize doing the work to address that. And I understand and I respect that we've put money into doing that work, and it is building equity in one way, but I mean, it's also offering services, right? It's offering services to the community that everyone is using, and we're hearing that there is equity concerns that are very, very specific around racial equity. I think we've also heard concerns around best supporting elders in our community and meeting accessibility needs in certain ways. So I guess that's really what I'm trying to get at, is thinking about that, yes, we are meeting some needs, but we are not meeting others. I know that that's always going to be the case, but also acknowledging that there is active harm in that.
It's valid what you say, and that is a difficult thing that we have to deal with. Are there any additional questions or comments?
On that particular motion?
In general?
All right, I would like to make a motion that we set aside $200,000 of ARPA funds to support equity in FY24 and beyond.
I don't believe we can do that. That's not been warned on the agenda, right? If we were making a decision about ARPA funding, that should be an agenda item. This is specifically about the FY24 general budget and capital plan.
All right.
Well, you can make the motion to allocate, because it's reserves right now.
Yep.
So you can move to increase the budget by that amount with the source being reserves, lower the reserves by that and increase the, is that what you're proposing? Is using, that would be right, it's reserve funds?
Angela?
We haven't warned that either, but it's something you could do anytime, honestly, if it was warned.
Okay.
If we're amending the FY24 budget to increase the use of ARPA to add in that position and additional money for equity, I think that it is covered by what's currently been warned. That would create an automatic need to increase taxes in FY25 by about 3.4 cents before any other increases.
Or remove it in FY25.
That's correct. Yeah.
And we are currently proposing that this position will come back in FY25 if it's not on the FY24 budget. So that sounds like, I don't know.
I'll second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion fails.
I would like to make a motion to add an advisory item on the ballot to ask residents if they would like the city to have an equity director position.
Is that something we can motion without language in the agenda packet?
I mean, you're voting on the warning next, so. Do you have an opinion, Jenny?
What is presented is the warning with the articles, with the 4 articles.
But it doesn't, if they could have voted to change it, they can be voting to change that, can't they? It isn't board yet.
I mean, they could, I guess.
That's my understanding. Angela, do you have any, either of you, do you have past experience with that, with the wording?
Not for an advisory item, with the way that it's currently proposed, I don't see a potential issue. The previous iterations that have been suggested of voting on the position as a separate item in the budget could pose challenges should that item pass and the other budget fail, where we then need to increase the overall budget and revote.
What is the language you're suggesting, Aurora?
I am suggesting it as an advisory item so that it is not a specific financial, but similar to what Councilor Duncan talked about a little bit is kind of asking residents in a similar way that we've done with, say, the pool or the regional dispatch, asking residents to kind of put their support for or against having that specific position within the city. So what I propose, and this might need to be workshopped a bit, is a ballot item that asks residents if they would like the city to prioritize having an equity director position. Or maybe if prioritize doesn't work, to just have an equity director position.
My concerns still stand in directing the manager essentially what staffing model needs to be used and having a vote behind that removes flexibility in the future when that's needed. Regardless of if there's money associated, I think it's still troubling to me. I'm just putting that out there.
I'm specifically putting it forward so that we're committed to doing that work. So I understand your concern, but that's also why I think it's important.
There's a motion on the table.
Kind of point of order, wouldn't this be more appropriate to our next item where we actually propose an amendment to our warning? And
Yes.
add in Article 5
Yeah,
with exact language.
let's revisit that.
Okay.
And I think if I comment on it, even though I asked to punt it, I think it's an interesting idea, and I wonder if we can make it position agnostic, and instead of adding a staff position mandate from the voters, if there's a way to word it that speaks to the work that you feel is not being adequately prioritized, that doesn't call out a specific position again, because if in 5 years that position is no longer the most impactful, we basically have to have a vote to undo that.
I think that would work well.
All right, so we are still on the FY24 general fund budget and capital plan.
So I have a motion to utilize $200,000 in reserve funds for one-time projects to further a language access plan and explore no fewer than 3 sustainable funding sources for an equity director position.
I'll second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. What was your motion, Bryn?
To allocate $200,000 in reserve funds for one-time project use to develop a language access plan and to provide no fewer than 3 sustainable funding source options for an equity director position.
Okay, I really apologize. I shouldn't have carried out that vote yet. I really want staff to weigh in on the feasibility of actually taking action on that.
So, 3 sustainable funding sources, I can tell you one, which is property taxes and local option taxes. I cannot think of a third right at this moment. I understand that's probably what the money's for, but I'm afraid I won't be able to come up with a third. And there is access to money now for a language actions plan, not that I would turn down reserve funds for that purpose, but so that you're aware in terms of making an informed decision. Through the Working Communities Challenge, that was, Yasmin had proposed to the Boston Fed that some of the, I think they call them initiative grants, be spent on that, and they conceptually approved and just needed a plan. So now we need to allocate time to create that plan so that we can propose it. So again, just, we're not gonna use, if we wanna be strategic with our use of reserve funds, that would be one thing to consider. Sort of like 6 of one, half does the other. We can save the Working Communities Challenge grant for other purposes, or we can save our reserve funds for other purposes.
And what is your ability to even carry out this work? Like, if we have this vote right now, I am having some regret here because this is something that we could do at any point. We don't have to do it right now. It's reserve funding. And we should really give time for staff to give us a timeline feasibility of having the capacity to do that work before allocating this money.
Yeah, it does feel more appropriate to have that direction as the strategic planning and part, I can't remember the order of the 3 words, strategic policy and
Priorities.
Planning session that generally happens in May, because then you'd have the full context of what staff has to do and what priority this should have in that whole list.
So this doesn't modify the FY24 budget at all, right? It's just a reserve fund allocation decision.
Yeah.
So is it even, are we amending, did we do anything? If we're discussing the FY24 general budget and this doesn't change that?
Right, if, to your point earlier in Angela's comment, if you're not proposing that we are doing any offsetting in the FY24 budget, then it doesn't have to be now.
Can it be now? Like, can we allocate?
Should it not be specifically warned?
I feel like it should.
Yeah.
I mean, could we do any reserve allocation requests now? If we wanted to allocate $1 million to sidewalks?
That does feel like a warning item, an item that needs to be.
If you wanted to increase your FY24 capital budget by $1 million, and note that it's one time only, you could potentially do that. I don't know that John, who is here somewhere, is going to be able to do $1 million of sidewalk work next year, but.
But if I picked a non-capital example, then. What if I said line striping? No, I'm just kidding.
While line striping.
Yeah, I don't know.
Bryn, can you email me that language so we can bring this back
I'd
with
be
a
happy
warning?
to. Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem.
Apologies for the,
Procedural, we're figuring it out.
yeah.
You might want to take a withdrawal vote, however that looks.
I actually don't know how to, I've never done that before. Could I have a motion to withdraw the past vote?
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Bryn, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. We will come back to this, though.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Is there any more discussion? Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the budget
And capital.
and capital plan as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve the FY24 budget and capital plan as proposed, or as presented.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Jim, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Okay, we are on to item C. So this is the actual town meeting warning. Aurora, do you have thoughts about position agnostic language?
Trying to think, because my sense from, would we want to give a specific money amount? Would we want to give a specific area? I'm just trying to figure out, like, if not the equity director position and not a money amount, just kind of.
Well, let me ask what the purpose is. Like, what is the outcome we would be looking to from this vote?
To advise the city, I think both on when thinking about reserve requests and in thinking about the FY25 budget, that kind of the priority of equity to residents. I'm thinking we could, I guess I'm trying to figure out how specific we would want to get of allocate funds to work on or explore concerns brought up in the equity audit, advisory to prioritize racial equity or that's why I'm wondering if maybe like the equity audit might be better because it covers a broad range of items. I'm not sure if any, or Jim, if you had any specific position agnostic language.
It's hard to think of it off the top of my head here in the meeting. No, sorry, not something I can spew out. Sorry.
Could creating an equity department to be staffed how the city manager sees appropriate guide what is being looked for, but also leave it up to staff to decide how to specifically use those funds?
To me, creating a department is equivalent to creating a role, a staff role, specific staff role.
I mean, it's similar, but Elaine could decide that maybe it's a coordinator that's needed and funds that would go towards paying coaches or trainers to come in, or it might be the equity director itself that takes up most of those funds.
I like to think of like to what end though, right? Like what is the equity? There's like the thing that you can envision doing the thing, but what is the thing that you want it to do? And I think that's what we want to know from voters. Like, is this or if there's a certain direction that we need to push this, and an end that we want to see, or a process that we want to see happen. Like, and I think that's where we sit at the policy level, and like that could be a grant, that could be a contract, right? It could be somebody doing contracted work. It could be somebody on staff. It could be a mix. And I think the implementation of that policy direction is what gets funded and fleshed out by staff. I think for this to like be flexible and then hopefully generate change, I would like to see what the end or the process is that we're after. And that's where I would, so that's why like, a director or a department, or saying like you need to contract out for a certain amount of stuff. Like I'd like to see it be more like, we want to see this be different next year. We want to see this be different in 5 years. So we want to see progress made on X, Y, or Z. Something that, so that's the kind of language I would be thinking about, is more to what ends are we asking for some sort of monetary investment.
Yeah, I want to remind us all that staff is coordinating with the school on a public outreach plan for the equity audit findings, which I think is where we're going to get far more actionable feedback and priority from community members. I'm challenged with any kind of advisory on the ballot that would provide us any new direction. Like, we already know this is a priority in Winooski. We're not able to, on the ballot, share findings from the audit or actions we're already taking. For me, I'm not seeing how there's going to be beneficial information here beyond what we're going to be able to collect in a few months' time from doing actual engagement sessions.
have an idea, but I don't know if it then feels contradictory. But then again, some of this is already work we are doing. But I was wondering if there's potential language around increasing equity of resident participation in the democratic process. But, you know, if people are having a hard time accessing the democratic process, they might not be able to vote on such an item. So I'm debating that.
So is, for just thinking about Councilor Duncan's question, like to what end? So just teasing that thought out a little bit more. So perhaps getting some direction through a ballot item that sustains, that helps sustain the position of the community regardless of council turnover.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Can you say that again?
So essentially, so one thing that Jim had mentioned, that he wants to ensure that there's some sustainable decisions that carry forward regardless of who the council makeup is. So is one of the ends, one of the goals, to get basically a pulse from the community to say how they want to elevate and strategically prioritize equity work regardless of what the council makeup is. Like, would that be useful to have as a true north, or just some direction that all council can come back to regardless of who's sitting in these seats?
I think that would be nice if there was something that felt actionable and appropriate to the community. Yes, I mean that's what it would do. Same with like the Main Street bond vote. In some ways, yes, it is an authority to borrow, but it's also like a blessing to proceed. And I think we kind of do commit ourselves for several years to walk that path. It doesn't mean that the council has to, but it definitely makes it harder to say no. Like that would be the benefit of having this kind of principle. Ballot item, advisory vote. I'm just worried that can we actually do it amongst the five of us in this time that we have, in a way that's genuine. I'm looking at the equity audit, and I don't want to jump the gun on the outreach and kind of taking this from audit to action. The one that we haven't spent a lot of like strategic time thinking about is that last one on developing strategies to increase civic participation among BIPOC residents. That's the one that I think there are a number of things in the budget currently that seek to do that. And we could ask if that's like the direction that we want our equity work to go. But I also would be like, we aren't asking whether we want housing equity to be furthered as well. And it just seems like this is, as I'm talking my way through it and kind of thinking about what you said, Mayor, of this kind of structured engagement we're about to have that could yield a really meaningful advisory vote to like solidify this is where we're going to go. Pinnacle of 5 years of work from 2019 onward to get to like a statement about what we're going to do for equity work in the city seems like a powerful end, and I'd hate to short circuit that with the article today. So that's, I guess, where I'm landing is like, this seems like the strategies to increase civic participation seems like the most granular thing that we can do, but it's not the only thing we're going to do. It's hard to imagine coming up with something now that will respect the broader work that we, I think, are already committed to. So it's a super rambly way of saying, I guess not. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting a little stuck on right? Like, this is the I guess, usefulness of having like a specific amount or a specific position. While I can recognize that there is some discomfort in the potential commitment, I also can see that as almost a shorthand to ensure that we are doing kind of what we're talking about more broadly, like all these different items. And I know that's kind of why I've been championing an equity director position, acknowledging that it's not a cure-all, but also acknowledging that it provides that kind of expertise and gives that kind of it provides council with that kind of a valuable resource in a way that, like, we're discussing all of this, and we've discussed this a lot, and I mean, I sent some resources and stuff like that. Like, these are all things that if we had an equity director position who was specifically looking at maybe kind of more equity initiative director, so looking at things internally, who could offer direction on stuff like this. So I think that's something too, is like, we're debating all this, and some of it is like, well, we're debating it because we don't have the capacity to ensure that we're doing exactly the right thing. So, right, coming back to like, what about, you know, asking folks to vote on a position that helps build that capacity, or maybe there's language to put in that asks residents if they would like the city to increase equity capacity or capacity for equity work in the coming years, something like that. Would that be specific enough, but also not specific enough? Like that, the sweet spot we're kind of trying to talk towards.
I wonder if it would be, we want to hire an equity director to do X, Y, and Z, and then just take out that we want to hire an equity director to say we want to do X, Y, and Z. Like, I still haven't heard that. Like, what is it? I'm looking at the equity director position now, like acting as a liaison, increasing understanding and access to city government practices. Like, I mean, what is the specific thing that we're not doing in the budget? Like, I wonder if there's something more specific that we can get to that's still not position or money tied, but that's like the work that we want done.
I have potential language. However, it needs wordsmithing. And it, like, you know, it's just an example. So, advisory, shall the community authorize the city manager to allocate X amount of dollars in general fund, local options tax, grant funds, or other acquired funds to be allocated to program positions, contract work, scholarships, or program funding to enhance equity priorities and strategies.
They already have this authority.
And the only doing there is enhancing equity priorities and strategies, which are set by the council. Like, what are those that we want to ask the voters to ossify and harden? Like, otherwise it's still just up to, like, our priorities are sidewalks, our priorities are program access and signups. Like, I just, like, what's the what there?
I feel like we would be much better positioned to have this conversation in the future after community engagement around the equity audit findings.
I tend to agree.
Like, this is certainly something we could come back to and consider for a future ballot, right? After we have more of that work done. I feel like it's premature to put something on there now for folks to vote on.
I tend to agree. I just, and this is hypothesizing, but from the regular folks that show up to those types of events are the folks that are showing up now and telling us that they want us to hire an equity director. So I have a hard time with thinking that we're going to do all of that work, which we should do anyway, but like, we're going to get to it. They're going to say hire an equity director, and then we're going to go this whole year without hiring an equity director and wait until we budget it next year. that might be a slightly pessimistic view of looking at participation, but I think we see the same faces. They're literally reaching out to all of us via email and whatnot. So I feel like we already know what they want. It's just whether do we fund it just straight up, and I mean, we already voted on the budget, but like, do we just increase the taxes to fund it now, or do we ask them, I think this is what you want, do you want this?
I think we're on a path to get more information. Like,
No,
we've
you know,
started engagement with community groups that we haven't been before. We have the ability to do more of that and to invite more people to whatever this structure is for the audit outreach. I don't necessarily think we're going to get the same responses or the same people showing up,
I hope not.
especially if we're like strategic about how we organize that and who we reach out to. I also want to think about, like, as a voter, when I see this, what do I think I'm getting for this vote?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's difficult to say, do you want to prioritize X area without the wraparound information of what else?
Excuse me.
What else? Like, why don't I get to vote on prioritizing,
Sidewalks.
Traffic calming?
yeah, or childcare access or something? Like, I still don't know what we're going to get or what voters are going to get out of an article.
Well, are you suggesting we cut those things? That's where I feel like those examples are disingenuous, where we're talking about a position that is being cut or put on hold. So that's where I feel like, again, having some specific information from the voters that, yes, they want to see this position back in FY25 or do that work. And I think it's hard, Councillor Duncan, as you bring up, are there specific items? One, it would be great to have an expert who's able to advise us on those items or to give the funds to engage community, and we're going to do that in part, on what are priority items. But I also think, as has come up, and I don't want to like go through like building a job description right now, but I think we know that the equity director position as it was originally was not sustainable, and what did it was in fact harmful, the amount of work. So again, my concern is like we're cutting or kind of moving this work aside, pushing it forward, whatever you kind of want to envision in the future, while, you know, not like, what does that equity position look like? Well, we're not going to have those conversations if we don't think we're going to have an equity director position. So that's one of the things I'm coming around to as well, of like, by not allocating these funds, these resources, it feels like we are, again, deprioritizing it. So we're not going to have the conversations on the ways we could make that a more sustainable position, or investigate a way to have a different position or to have other support. So that's what I come back to, where it feels like, again, we're deprioritizing, so we're stopping conversations from happening before they do. And again, you can argue with me on whether you agree. But I do think if we're not trying to figure out these issues in a very specific way, again, thinking about a very specific position, no, we're not prioritizing it. We're not going to think about, well, what are ways we can do equity better? So I know that is a long-winded thing to say, but that is why I keep coming back to specifically putting forward an equity director position, because it's an actionable item that we could take the time to, you know, take that time to improve. And if we had it as an advisory item, then as we have these community conversations with the school, we might know then how best to, if we have that, maybe even ask, should the city have an equity position or an equity specific position? Maybe that's better if we don't specifically want an equity director, but recognize the value of having someone with that type of expertise and just the capacity. So the capacity isn't, like, one thing I see is I think a lot of this work may still get done, but it'll get done unpaid, and that is exhausting, and that is unequitable in its own way and leads to burnout. So that's another thing that comes back to me as well. So maybe what I will do is move to add an advisory ballot item to ask residents if they would like to see the city have an equity-specific position in the future, or take out in the future.
Could you word it as an article? So shall the voters of the city of Winooski direct,
The city,
or shall do just like what's the language so that it can be exact what it'll end up on the, because it needs to be exactly what's going to be on the warning. And maybe, I don't know if we want to call it recess so you can write it, but I wouldn't want to vote on a concept that needs to get written.
Do you have language, Aurora?
shall the voters of Winooski.
Do you want 5 minutes?
I can try.
Let's call a recess at 7:12. We'll reconvene at 7:17.
This is at least how I started it. You can adjust and revise based off of the feedback we got.
Jurors report? Come on up.
Alright, just give me a second.
Certainly.
Okay. Alright, good evening, everyone. I'm John Fenney, City Treasurer. I'm here to present some key takeaways from the second quarter of the FY23 financial reports. So in Q2, we continue to see Winooski's financial position strengthening as community activity returns back to pre-pandemic levels, which is good. The city's general fund currently projects a surplus of about $400,000. The bulk of the increased forecast surplus is due to cost savings from staff vacancies across multiple departments, so very similar to Q1. We are also forecasting surpluses in the following enterprise and special revenue funds. Again, same as last quarter, which are the combined parking garage fund, the TIF fund, and the community and economic development fund. Again, similar to Q1, we are forecasting deficits in the following: the water fund, wastewater fund, community services fund, and the rental registry fund. One thing I will add though, for the water fund and wastewater fund, we may see these deficits turn to surpluses by the end of the year, the way that we're tracking. So specific details to support current forecasts can be found within the respective financial report on the City of Winooski's website. Please bear in mind that this is a Q2 report, which is through December 31st, and that projections are our best guess, guided by the financial activities we've realized so far, and therefore are subject to change as we progress through the year. Are there any questions?
I'll go.
Go ahead.
Sure. Could you tell us a little bit more why you think those water deficits might turn into surpluses?
Yeah, sure. So the big reason there for those two funds are due to the 36 Mounts Bay and 355 Main building projects that we've been doing there, and kind of chat about this in Q1 as well. So the way that we've been forecasting for the revenue for those two funds has been based on activity but due to the project going on at those locations, they haven't been full. So starting in Q2, I believe both locations were fully occupied. So that going forward, we can forecast better knowing what the actual consumption will be or the revenue will be now that they're fully occupied. So we're thinking in Q3, Q4, we'll have a better idea. But to give you some context there, for example, the wastewater fund, we were projecting a deficit of about $110,000 in Q1, and now the projected deficit is 60, which is a difference of 50. And that's all from ramping up occupants in Q2.
Great, thank you.
And similar question, what is the estimated deficit for the rental registry?
As of now, it's $29,000, and compared to Q1, it's actually $15,000 in the green, better.
Okay.
So we started billing for some of those properties, but we're anticipating to be billing fully in FY24.
Okay.
I didn't see an end of year projection for parking. There was like a 10K surplus right now. Did I just miss it?
On the full report, or did I skip it when I was just?
In the report?
I hope it's there.
Maybe I just missed it.
I think it's there.
Looks like it is.
I'll pull it up.
Under enterprise funds?
But just for parking, the combined parking garage fund, it's about the same as Q1. It's a surplus of about $10,000.
Yeah, are you expecting that to maintain though through end of year or?
Just remember that the Cascades garage, any additional surplus that is created there will automatically get transferred to the tip. So
Okay.
it's not changing.
Yeah, it nets zero exactly.
Okay, thank you for that reminder.
Does that clear up your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Any other questions? No questions from members of the public? Oh, we have some attendees now. You can use the raise hand feature if you have any questions or comments for the treasurer's report. Okay. Let's move on to item F then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, proposed changes to sidewalk use.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm here to have continued discussion on the proposed changes to the sidewalk use information, specifically Chapter 5 of the Municipal Code. We had some preliminary discussion on this at your last meeting on the 17th. So tonight we're here to talk in more detail if you're ready to do that, and also potentially set a public hearing. Possible date would be on February 21st. I have some additional information to provide based on the comments and questions from the last meeting, as well as some additional information to share with you all tonight. So I can do that as well, either during at the beginning here, or I can go through my new stuff and then we can follow up on last week's meeting.
Let's do that.
Okay, great. So the one thing I wanted to do, as Councilor Renner alluded to earlier, I was at the Downtown Board Association's meeting last Wednesday and provided this information to them. And at that meeting, I provided them a really quick presentation of what this might look like as far as the sidewalk use is concerned. So I wanted to share that with you tonight as well. So this is a brief slide with some animations that I have prepared to hopefully give a better sense of what this might look like. I think it's really important to point out that this is a very generic overview and is not really specific to any one area, but hopefully will give a better sense of what we're talking about here. So right now, as we look at our sidewalks, we have our curb line, we have the granite belt, we have in some instances a step up, another granite step, and then the brick pavers at the building facade. So overall, we're looking at about 13 feet of depth. And this is a general number because in some cases there's not the step. In other cases, the building facade bumps out a little further. So generally speaking, the overall profile from curb face to building facade is about 13 feet. I should also mention in some cases there's 2 steps. So in front of the Winooski block, there's 2 steps down in those areas. So, but generally the curbs are about 6 inches wide, 6 to 8 inches. They're granite curbs, so they're not a uniform dimension. There's a 5-foot granite paver belt where we have our trees and other street amenities. Then in some instances a step up or not, and then again the 7 foot of brick pavers for the pedestrian walkway. So right now most of the buildings or most of the businesses are only utilizing the area on the granite pavers. Even when there's a step there, or even absence of a step, they're still generally confining their outdoor space to that granite belt. What we're proposing with this, with these changes, would have them shift that space 2 feet from the face of the curb. So basically 1.5 feet in from the back side of that curb, from where they are. In some instances, if there is the step, they'll have to accommodate that in one form or another. I had one business owner reach out to me as we were talking about this and basically said he wouldn't have any issues with accommodating the space because he would just take the legs off his picnic tables and just shorten them a bit so he could shift them over, accommodate that step. No issue with that. We do allow for, though, in the draft for the inclusion of structures. If a business chooses to build something in there to take out the step, to flatten that area out, they do have that ability. They may need to get permitting for that just because of the structural nature of it, but that is an option that is offered. So shifting that usable space that they're currently dealing with now, the 2 feet off of the curb face. So then what that does is it leaves our 5 foot of clear pedestrian pathway against the building facade. Again, varying depending on what the facades actually look like. And then that creates kind of this 1 foot space that is new space in essence. It's not going to be a foot for everybody necessarily. In some cases it may be a little more, maybe a little less. But by shifting the area that we're using in closer to the building, creating that offset from the curb face, in some instances the businesses may actually end up getting more usable space for their outdoor seating or their outdoor use in general, depending on what the business is doing. So just wanted to share this with you quick. The reactions and the feedback I got from the downtown board meeting were pretty positive. So they thought that this was a good graphic to represent what's being proposed. So I wanted to share it with you all tonight as well. Any questions on that?
No, I appreciate the graphic.
Yeah, and again, this is very, I don't want to say this is representative because it's not everywhere has a step, not everywhere has all these widths. It's just, but I think it gives a general idea of what the businesses may be faced with as we advance forward with some of these requirements. So I'm going to stop my share here. So with that, moving forward, at our last meeting we did talk about some of the liability component. We did have some correspondences with our loss prevention specialist. Is that?
Can't remember if specialist is right, but
loss prevention agent from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Some email correspondences and also a site visit specifically to talk about some of these items. And in the cover sheet in the agenda packet, there's some quoted language basically talking about the fact that we should, the quoted language is in reference to the overhang and doing something to accommodate that because of the angled parking and using some form of standard that we can point to. There was a memo included in the agenda packet as well from John Rauscher that provided some additional information on the overhangs and on the specific details of that based on where we're getting those references. So that information is provided. We also, following up on the site visit related to the liability component, we did receive an email back from VLCT basically saying, and I'll read a few lines from the email specifically. Basically, they're saying that it's all about exposure to the city. There are concerns with allowing close placement of patron tables to vehicle travel paths that do create a potential risk for the city. If there is an incident, it's probable that the business owner and the city would be named in a suit. Because of this potential, I suggest the city consider adding the following elements. The first one being that businesses name the city as an additional insured with respect to the sidewalk usage, which we do include in this draft. And I think more specifically to your question, Councilor Oakleaf, about the amount of liability, they had recommended a minimum of $5 million per occurrence of general liability that could be provided by a combination of primary coverage or umbrella or excess insurance limit. They also note, however, that that could be expensive. And so as a fallback, but not an ideal position, the city could accept $2 million per occurrence and in the aggregate limit, though this would be the bare minimum. So the $2 million, what we're suggesting is also the bare minimum that our folks at VLCT would recommend going forward for some level of protection. I believe, let's see, let me look. Oh, there was another question about travel, the drive aisle width for emergency services. And general standard for emergency fire lanes, as an example, is 20 feet. So right now that travel lane is at about just over 12 feet for us. And we wouldn't want to go any less than that, because with our new fire truck in particular and any existing equipment, they will have the outriggers that need placement. So anything less than generally 15 feet is not ideal, but 12 feet is doable. So we wouldn't want to, I don't believe we'd want to go below that number from an emergency services standpoint. Let's see. Oh, there was another question about creating maps for each space. We did talk about that as staff, and from we for one, we don't have all the survey data to be able to create that detailed level of information. And from a resource standpoint, it may actually make more sense to work with the businesses directly based on what they actually might want if they're looking to get additional space from an adjacent business, which is also laid out in the regulations, and really just work with them one-on-one to lay out the space. That way we can go on site and identify any facilities that the city might own or might have as far as signage, waste receptacles, bicycle racks that may need to be accommodated as well. So that's probably the preferred option for us, is to have that one-on-one interaction with the businesses rather than trying to draw up some sort of a diagram that they have to follow directly. Otherwise, I don't think I had anything specific for follow-up other than, as I note in the cover sheet on the agenda, because this is an ordinance amendment, our charter does require that it be introduced by a member of council as we go forward to set a public hearing. So with that, I will open it up.
We do have a business owner on, so I can invite public comment unless there's any questions from council first.
Not at the moment.
Okay. Attendees, please use the chat or raise hand feature if you wish to speak. Laura Wade, I'm wondering if you have thoughts to share. Oh, and Meredith is on. Oh, great. You're on mute still, though, Meredith.
Oh, are you inviting me to speak?
I am, yeah, sorry. You were like, Paul moved you over already, so we got out of order.
Great. Oh, Meredith is here will be my opportunity to speak from now on.
Yeah.
I am here representing downtown Winooski as the executive director. I do not speak for every board member, of course, but I am here specifically to speak on behalf of a few different business owners that have sent me comments and questions. They are unable to be here for various reasons. So the first is I'm going to go through the comments first because there's not specific questions, and then I will go into the questions. The first comment is, that won't affect us, but geez, that's a bummer for everyone else. I always thought it could be cool to see booths where some of the parking spaces are. You see that all over the place in other cities. So, of course, that was a comment in quotes. And then my commentary is that this is something that we, as downtown Winooski and as the city, have had conversations
In my mind, and certainly it's up to the council and city staff to decide this. To me, this is a completely separate issue. Usage of parking spaces for seating and for other things, I don't think is particularly part of this particular question, a municipal code change, but just something to consider that this is always on people's minds. And while I don't have a specific person and a specific quote to share tonight, this is something that is anecdotally shared with me all the time, that people would love to see parking spaces utilized for outdoor dining or other uses. And then on the complete opposite side, I also receive a lot of commentary that we should never use parking for anything other than parking. So there's that. And then the other comment that I have is 2 feet seems like a ridiculously large overhang. The 8 inches should be enough to accommodate cars and trucks. If the city wants to do this, they should put out barriers and chains if they feel there is a safety concern. And I know that there was a discussion about certain barriers being put in place as part of the forum and as part of the previous discussion. So I just wanted to share that as well. Anything else? Can I just move on to the questions?
Yeah.
Or do we have? Okay, cool. First question is, I wonder if there is a way to switch to different parking, such as parallel parking, from May 1st to September 30th, and then go back to an angled parking in the winter. So has there been a discussion about changing the orientation of parking? In my understanding, there has been a conversation, but I'd love to hear from staff about what changing the orientation of parking from the angled parking that currently exists around certain parts of the Rotary to like a parallel parking or a different degree of angle. What would that, has that been discussed and has that been dismissed as a possibility?
I'll be happy to answer now. Sure, and I'll look to John as well on the Zoom. So we did look at that. We did look at changing the angle of the parking, and we did, I believe we even looked at parallel parking along, at least in the downtown area around the Rotary. The challenge is that because of the built structure that's there as well, the curb line that exists and the existing sidewalks, the angled parking that's there now, it was all designed for the current angle. So there would be a significant loss of parking, I would say, if we changed up the angles. And I think it just creates other challenges with trying to get in and out of those spaces. So John, I'll let you add anything you want to as well.
Yeah, not much more to add on that, but we did look at a couple different options. We looked at shuttling up the angles to try to get more space. We looked at the parallel parking, but I mean, cars are, 20, usually those parking spaces are like 20 foot wide, so now you're looking at maybe getting 2 cars, 3 cars maximum in those spaces. You currently have about 10, I think. So that seems pretty feasible. And then just the idea of like seasonally switching over. I mean, as you know, we have a hard time enough just doing line striping for just regular roads, and the idea of having to like convert from one type of parking scenario to another would be pretty challenging operationally too.
Thanks. Meredith, you have additional questions? You're on mute again if you're talking.
Yeah, I'm struggling. I've got it. I'm on mute now. I'm looking at my notes. Thank you so much to staff for answering those questions. The other question that I received is and I believe this was discussed briefly in the previous meeting, but not to call you out again, John, but the question I received was, what does the 2-foot overhang achieve? Not against it, just confused about that specific distance. Why wouldn't something smaller or larger work better?
Yeah, I can answer that. So in the memo, I have some dimensions that are shown in there. So those dimensions come from the National Parking Association. And that's typically what we utilize. That's kind of the main reference for any sort of municipal on-street parking. So for a 45-degree angle parking that we have in the downtown, the design overhang dimension is 1 foot 9 inches. So that would be the actual minimum. It's really hard to sort of manage or enforce 1 foot 9 inches. So I think that's what we sort of landed on. All right, let's just call it 2 feet, just to make it easy for everyone else. But that's where that number comes from.
And I'll just add a bit to that as well. So I did after the last meeting, I did some research on vehicles and the amount of overhang they have. So looking at 4 different vehicles that are fairly common around this area, measuring from basically the center of the wheel, so including the rim, half of the tire, and then any other overhang. Looking at a Ford F-150, it has a 3.15 foot overhang distance. A Toyota RAV4 has 2.98 foot overhang. Chevy Silverado is 3.08 foot overhang. And a Subaru Outback has a 3.28 foot overhang. So they've all got a fairly good distance in there. Again, measuring from the center of the wheel, so that's going to be variable what the actual overhang distance is in front of that tire may be based on the size of the rim, etc. But just to give you a sense of what we're actually talking about as far as what vehicle overhang looks like.
My husband parked our Suburban up there, and it was 20 inches over the curb, so I was skeptical of your 2 feet, but less so now.
Thank you guys so much. I actually have one more question. I'm so sorry I missed it. The other question that I had was about the 5 foot ADA compliant walkway, and just concerned that is that an appropriate amount, and is it, like, if people, and knowing that nothing is perfect in terms of inches, if someone is trying to be compliant and push their seating in 2 feet from the curb, and then maybe they're trying to get 5 feet, but maybe it's a little bit less. Is that a concern for any reason, not just ADA compliance, but compliance with, allowing our streets to be friendly to walkers of all kinds, strollers, dogs, people walking their bikes, because no one's going to be riding their bikes on a sidewalk. People will be walking them kindly. Is there any issue there with that available space, that sort of 5 foot area?
So I think, and again, I'll look to John here as well, but I think what I would say is, given the location in a downtown environment, 5 feet is the least amount of space we would be comfortable with. ADA, I believe, allows as low as 3 feet for clearance, but given that generally when we pour a sidewalk somewhere, it's a 5 foot wide sidewalk, the least amount of distance we would want to do is 5 feet. Given it's a downtown area, we would prefer more, quite frankly, I think, but we also want to be mindful of the businesses and trying to accommodate the outdoor space that they do rely on for their businesses in the warmer months. So I think 5 feet would be probably the bare minimum we'd be comfortable going with.
Yeah, I agree with that. So if you look at some of the V-Trans documentation that's out there, for a downtown area, 7 to 8 feet is sort of recommended clear pathway. It's not a regulatory requirement. It's just, that's a more comfortable width when you have a higher level of traffic in that urban setting. But 36 inches is the minimum needed. 5 foot is sort of the compromise to accommodate having cafe seating, public use, and cars. There's a lot going on with these corridors, and it's trying to balance those spaces. So that is sort of one of the compromises with this is, 5 foot would be the recommended minimum.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate everyone's time. That was all of the questions and comments that I had collected for this meeting. I don't know if there's other public comments right now, but we, at Downtown Winooski, we obviously have the city's vitality, economic vitality, and the small businesses at heart. but we understand that there is sort of a rock and a hard place situation here with the safety and the liability now that we know we can't unknow this information. And so we definitely would encourage the council to move forward with a, any questions or discussion, and then any approvals or any actions that need to be taken. And we certainly appreciate the fact that this does require that public meeting because it is a municipal code change. And we would certainly do our part to help promote that within any interested parties if there are additional public comments that would come through at that time. That's it for me. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Meredith.
One other thing I would just add, Meredith made the comment about the use of parking spaces for seating. That is something we did look at in the evaluation of this. We did move on from that again because there were comments and concerns about the loss of the parking. But I would say if that is something we wanted to revisit in the future, the changes that are proposed in this ordinance update would not impact removing the parking to use for seating or to do something else related in that regard.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Any more questions from council?
I have a question. Meredith, it's actually a question for you. Did you receive any business comment about the section which is going to be proposed as 5.11 permit application as it relates to B, 5.11B? In addition to specific requirements, no structures, canopies, tents, umbrellas, banners, signs, light strings, hindrances, or similar elements shall be erected or placed in whole or in part in a manner that would be located above or below designated pedestrian travel route. I haven't gone down and done an assessment or evaluation to know what the status of things are now. I know that just reading through some previous comments, there was some concern about losing the vibrancy, and just kind of wondering to what extent that particular item would impact current conditions for businesses.
It's my understanding that that specific section that you're talking about is already kind of adhered to. So essentially what that means is that if somebody has an umbrella that's lower and someone could just walk into it with their head, that would be not allowed. So that is something that is now being written, and this, as far as I understand, that is already being adhered to, and now it's just finally being put into writing. So I have not heard any pushback on that specific item, no.
Okay, great, thank you.
Would someone like to make a motion to set a public hearing for February 21st, 2023?
We need to formally introduce it.
Yeah,
first.
sorry, thank you.
Oh, yeah. I don't have the language for that.
And it could be that you just introduce the proposed amendments for a public hearing to be held at whenever you're comfortable holding that.
Would someone like to introduce the proposed sidewalk, what are they called? Proposed changes to sidewalk use amendments at a public hearing to be held February 21st?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we get Bob back on?
Yes, he can actually call in if you would like that.
Yes,
Session
please.
with him live.
And we're gonna go back to item C, which was the warning language for town meeting day.
Hi, can you call in now? Okay, sorry, thanks.
All right, we're just waiting for our city attorney to join. Bob, can you hear us?
I can hear.
Excellent. Did you already share what we were discussing, Elaine?
I did, yes. Bob, you said you had some advice.
So first, let me make sure I do understand what it is that's being proposed. Can you just restate it for me, Elaine?
So, a counselor is looking to propose something for the ballot that would be an advisory item envelope language, have an equity, for the city to have an equity-specific position in the future.
All right, so let me just provide a little bit of context for advisory questions. So the Secretary of State cautions municipalities to consider carefully what kind of advisory questions they're putting on a ballot. And their advice is that it's best if those any petitions relate to matters over which voters have control. So in this situation, the Winooski Charter provides for a number of identified positions that the city manager is entitled to fill. So there is a question as to whether an equity position is a position that the city manager can fill or cannot fill. I don't know the answer to that question, but an equity position is not specifically identified in the charter. And in any event, even if it is, that is a city manager responsibility. It's not a board or council responsibility. So the voters in this case are two or three steps removed from the question of whether an equity position should be appointed. Even with an affirmative vote, the city manager is not obligated to follow that opinion, nor is the council. And the control of the council over that is really hiring or firing the city manager. Because it's not the council's authority to appoint, to fill positions. That's the city manager's responsibility under the charter. So my concern about this kind of question is that if the council needs to consider very carefully what might be the impact of putting this on the ballot and what control it has over the outcome of that vote. The Secretary of State suggests that a council or select board doing this may find itself in a position not being able to satisfy the outcome of the advisory opinion and just create set of mad voters rather than actually accomplishing what they want to accomplish. So those are sort of political questions that I want you to think about. I'm not giving you an opinion as to what you should or shouldn't do, but you should think that through before you reach a final decision. If you want to do it, the wording needs to be very direct. The Secretary of State recommends that these petitions be stated as yes, no questions. And I think in this situation, the question would be, should the city create and fill an equity position, with however you want to define that more precisely in a petition. So that's how it should be structured if you want to do it.
Thank you, Bob. Aurora, did you have new language you wanted to have us consider?
Let's see. Wrote something down, but trying to make sure that it would match what legally suggest, I feel like the simple is best, so I almost would lean towards doing exactly what was just presented. I guess my only question would be, do we put would rather, okay. No, I don't think I have more specific language that would alter what was presented.
I mean, hearing Bob's update from Secretary of State, it further confirms my concern that we're putting something on a ballot that misleads voters about their authority. Like, they could vote on this, it might not happen, and it leaves an implication that they can direct, or that voters have closer control over what positions we have at the city anyhow.
I share those concerns.
All right. I will put forward the motion and we go from there. So I move that the city should add an advisory item on the ballot that asks voters, should the city create and fill an equity position?
Is a motion on the table?
I'll second.
Motion by Aurora, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion fails.
I was
Did you-
abstaining. I was
Did you
abstaining.
abstain? Sorry. I thought I heard you, Thomas.
No, that's okay.
Would someone like to make a motion to approve the town meeting warning as presented?
So moved.
It's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Jim, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you.
Sorry, what were the votes?
Aurora made a motion that Thomas seconded.
I'm sorry, what was the outcome of the second vote?
The second vote, it carried.
Oh, what was it, 4-1?
Didn't everyone say aye?
2, 5?
I thought I
Aurora
heard.
did not.
I'm sorry. Those opposed? Nay. Okay. 3-1.
3-1.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. We are on item G now. On for discussion approval, Winooski Police Department K-9 Program. Welcome, Chief.
Good evening, everybody. So a little table setting for tonight's agenda item for folks at home that may not have watched the budget presentation. What I'm proposing in this current FY24 budget is the addition of a K-9 program utilizing drug asset forfeiture funds that we've accumulated over 8 years of having a detective assigned to that unit. An updated accounting of that actual account, there's actually $125,000, not 90 in there, that is available right now. There's also 39 pending asset forfeiture sharing decisions that we're waiting to hear about, several hundred thousands of dollars, but I don't know what our percentage of that will be, so it could range anywhere from a few hundred, depending on what we did on that particular case, up to multiple thousands if we had a lead detective. So it's very much a moving target. I think a conservative estimate would be that by the time all of those forfeiture funds work their way through the system, that we could probably see as much money as what is in there now. So it would be double what we have. I'm not asking for any additional tax increases or revenue to stand this program up. I'm very confident utilizing an existing low mileage newer vehicle that we'll be able to add one vehicle to the fleet without actually having to go outside of our annual capital purchase of one new cruiser a year. What I estimate is approximately $22,000 to stand up the program, give or take a few thousand depending on, there's a fluctuation in the price of the dog. Obviously, equipment and the availability of that to outfit the cruiser is constantly in flux with global supply issues, but I don't think it'll be a huge fluctuation in what that estimate is. So I was just looking for approval through this process to start this process of outfitting a cruiser, identifying a dog, allowing our handler to start to bond with that dog, and then attending the patrol section certification for that K-9 starting in mid-June of '23.
All right, thanks for coming back with that. Any questions from council?
I have a procedural question. If the money's already in the chief's budget, why does it need to come to us for this budgetary season?
Well, part of it, I think, is it's a new program that you haven't authorized before, is my understanding.
It's more transparency. I just wouldn't want to start something new and not have you all involved in that conversation. I don't think that would be a good business practice. It's not how I've led the department. I want you to all to understand, be transparent, and understand the direction of the department and any new programs that we start.
And I think given the questions that we fielded last time, that made it appropriate.
Yep, no, that's fair. I was just, there's a dollar amount, obviously, but it's in your budget already, so I was just curious as to why.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, this was part of our policy priorities back from May, so I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
I'm curious what the asset forfeiture funds can be used for. I understand the enterprise funds. I don't think I've been filled in or don't remember being filled in on the asset forfeiture funds.
Sure, the major uses are equipment, training, and programs.
The restrictions from the federal government around asset forfeiture funds is that they must be used to supplement your programming. You cannot use it to supplant existing governmental funds.
And is it specific to law enforcement, drug enforcement, anything more
Yes.
specific? Drug related also?
Law enforcement purposes only.
Law enforcement.
So I was doing a little bit of research on this and discovered that there are actually quite a few communities in Chittenden County that have K-9 units.
Yes. I think we're the only one that doesn't.
I guess I was under the impression that we wanted a K-9 unit because we would be unique and not that we were unique because we didn't have one.
So the way I would describe this best is that, police departments are on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is 168 hours a week. If you have a K-9 officer, they obviously work 40 hours a week. And then based on each individual's department's needs and wants for when they want that K-9 available, training, vacations, sick days, you can't have enough dogs. There's several times we've called for K-9s on major incidents where there just didn't happen to be one on duty, so we're just adding to that overall resource for the county.
And there's also thinking about what's the, police officers, you have a retirement time frame. What's a retirement time frame for a K-9 unit?
So I'll tell you that's a moving target depending on the dog, the size of the dog, what its career looks like, but generally the accepted practice for that investment is 8 to 12 years.
And remind me what the breed of the dog you were searching for is?
I believe it's Malinois.
Do you mind spelling that?
I have no idea how to spell that.
Can you say it again?
Yeah.
Malinois. I believe is the spelling.
Malinois?
Malinois.
Okay.
It's a smaller, I think, family of the German Shepherd, but a smaller, more agile dog.
Technically a Belgian Malinois. It's spelled
Yeah.
Malinois. That helps.
Malinois.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I'm also in doing some additional research. Noticed that Wilson has a Comfort K-9 program.
They do.
Is that something that you've considered?
Actually, yes. And I plan on coming back to you. I didn't want to come at you with too many new things all at once, but it is being discussed where we have an officer who is actually interested in that. The cost is very minimal because you don't have to outfit a cruiser. It's just a handler taking care of the dog and bringing it back and forth to work. I am very interested in that because I believe we could serve two purposes, right? Like the police K-9, patrol K-9 serves a purpose, but we could also do a lot of outreach, and I think there's a need and a purpose for a comfort dog here that would be a good fit to have both. But I didn't, we are just barely scratching the surface with this and have touched base with Williston on what's involved and what their experience has been. It's been a very positive experience, so I think it's something I'll be bringing to you with the prospective handler soon.
And I would love to hear a little bit more about the policies for the training. So I've seen nationally there's some transition away from bite and hold to bark and freeze or something like that. I don't have the terminology correct, but what's Vermont's training policy?
So I don't want to speak out of turn. I am not a canine expert. My belief is that they have transitioned to that as well, that it is not just a release and bite program anymore and hasn't been for some time.
And do we have any sense of what, if there are any lawsuits against Vermont municipalities for canine units?
I'm not aware of any that have been publicized.
I have to say that the companion canine, comfort canine program sounds more attractive to me personally. Just from, again, really high level research on canine units and history of canine units. So that's kind of where my feelings are with that at the moment.
Do you want to respond to the history piece of it?
Yeah, I completely understand, and Councilor Oakleaf, I appreciate that context. Here's my take on a lot of things. Almost everything in policing, you have two trains of thought on, right? Like fair and impartial policing, use of force, qualified immunity. The list goes on and on and on where there's two very different trains of thought. I respect both sides and try and figure out what's best for our community. As far as the patrol canine, my thought process for that is it's a tool for our patrol division to both feel the officer. This is an officer safety program that will help them feel safe. It will add to our capacity without having to add an additional human police officer. I think there's an understated value for search and rescue that isn't talked about enough with a canine. If a child or somebody with diminished mental capacity was to wander off, that could be utilized for that. Cadaver recovery, there's a lot of different certifications that a canine can get, that it's not just what people see on TV, right, as a patrol dog that is jumping out of a patrol car all the time. And there is a community outreach piece to that. I think the comfort dog would be more suited to that and I would be more comfortable if it's going to be in a loud, noisy setting with multiple people coming and wanting to touch and pet the dog, that I think a comfort dog is more suited for that. And my thought process for the canine is that this is a tool for patrol to help keep our officers safe, to support that. and to give them buy-in and investment in the department, that they're getting a specialized assignment without taking from the patrol schedule right now.
Could,
I'm good.
okay. Can I ask, what was kind of presented in the memo and what you talked about last time was that it, really the idea was for it to be tracking and clearing buildings. Would this dog ever be used in, like a confrontation? Or are you strictly, feel more comfortable if it was just strictly for thinking about tracking and clearing buildings?
I think that's something that we need to weigh the investment and what the purpose of the dog is as a patrol. I think it would be short-sighted to not have it be available in a situation where we needed a dog to enter a building and do that. So I guess the short answer is yes, it would be trained in that, you know, with the understanding that it's not just a bite dog, and you know, there's limited circumstances for that, which is one thing I wanted to mention is that the Vermont Criminal Justice Council has a subcommittee specific to the canines, the canine programs, and they're in charge of oversight, best practices. I can send you that link if you're interested in learning more about it. They meet quarterly. They track both training and in-field uses for those dogs and go over that regularly to make sure that the best outcomes are happening. So I would rely on the experts that are actually doing that training, doing that business, to talk about the pros and cons of the questions that you've brought up.
I'll just kind of add on to what Thomas said. I have no further concerns on this. I think you explained the benefit to our officers, and we can't engage them in kind of leaving work training. This is a real opportunity to provide something to the officers, and we can't support them in other ways monetarily right now. So given that this is something we've already approved, once I'm supportive of continuing that approval.
Thank you. I hope you all know, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I hope you all know that, you know, we built a relationship over the years, and I take very seriously police services and how we deliver those services in the city, and that will continue after me. My officers also take that very seriously. Nobody wants to come into work and be involved in a use of force situation that, you know, optically doesn't look great to the public. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to build capacity. We're also trying to retain young employees that are surrounded by, quite frankly, communities all around us that are hiring and interested in fully trained officers. So this is about officer safety, officer retention, you know, and creating an environment that they feel some buy-in to the police department where they want to make you know, an 8 or 12-year career out of that, and a canine can do that for somebody.
Thanks. I was just going to invite public comment. If there's any questions or comments about this topic. Okay.
So I have a procedural question.
Yeah.
So I know that this is on for discussion approval. I don't know if it's generic enough as Winooski Police Department K-9 program to amend it to add a comfort K-9 authorization as well.
If we want to like pre-authorize that,
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
someone could make a motion to that effect.
I second.
Is it okay if we come back to you at some point and do a presentation?
I think we should. I think we should, because I also wonder, because this doesn't warn the comfort K-9.
Sure.
So I think it should come back.
We'd be happy to do that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Brennan and a second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are on to H, the strategic vision area goal update for safe, healthy, connected people.
Come over to join you, and I don't know if John is still on there as well, John Uddy, but per usual, hopefully these updates are pretty straightforward. Definitely excited to see more green than last time on here, which was good. I think a few things that had been lagging a little bit seemed to get a jump start, but happy to answer any questions that folks have on this update.
Any other questions?
It's good to see green.
No surprises.
No.
Paul, if you want to drop that link to the chat for the public's use of reference.
I guess just elaborating and revisiting conversation from previous weeks about the O'Brien Center and
Sure.
kind of how can we continue to optimize that space while negotiations are ongoing.
Sure.
And I think, council has allocated some, indicated some intention to continue to optimize that in the FY24 budget, but
Yep.
obviously, there's still 6 months left of this year as well.
Yeah, and Elaine, you can throw tomatoes or whatever if I get off track, but I think, definitely want to say, while that was an item listed in green, multiple government agencies trying to talk about transition of property is slow, and so it's moving, but just at the pace of government, as we like to joke. So I do think there's, good faith, good work happening there. In the interim, again, my department is really looking at how to reallocate time and resources, especially during the non-summer months, towards weekends and evenings. And so I have a couple staff members pretty much every week that are shifting and making themselves available to make that space open to the public. We're definitely committed to doing that. I certainly think as we get closer to summer and our busy season really picks up, that does become a little bit more challenging for us. Conveniently, though, folks' desire to be inside dwindles a bit too. So I think we will see a bit of a leveling there. But again, we're committed to continuing to try to make that available where we can. I think we're still not at a point capacity-wise where we're ready to sort of fully advertise and promote and really, go full bore there. But we're certainly answering the phone when folks are calling.
And I guess in that same vein, is there any contingency planning on the city's effort if the negotiations take longer than expected?
Yeah, I think Angela's budget. That was a slip. Yes, the budget that Angela had designed into the recommendation is like status quo, like what we have going on now. So that is basically the contingency plan. We continue as planned. Some of the deferred maintenance might have to come back on that we aren't planning on. So unfortunately, that's a reserves conversation.
Okay.
I would say too, though, just to add to that, I think if we find ourselves in a position where the transfer of that building is not going to move forward, we have a bunch of empty space then that we would move to sort of activate in a different way and probably look to bring in tenants on is my guess. I don't think we're going to want to sit on that as empty space in perpetuity. I think we've been holding it knowing there may be changes afoot, but I think that's another piece that would help impact the budget in a positive way.
Right, and I guess I'm just wondering, is there a capacity for us to, how long can we wait? How long should we wait?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd say that the way the conversations are going, I do feel like this is the best option. So as long as they seem viable, that's how long I think we should wait. And in terms of budgeting, I mean, yes, at some point the deferred maintenance will be threatening. So I don't have a month in that. I don't know that John does either.
I guess I don't want to get 3 years down the road and be like, well, we should have had a plan, or we should have had a point in time where if this particular mile marker isn't met by this timeline, do we start to talk about pivoting?
Yeah, that's fair. And I do. This would be another thing for the May strategy priority session that
Okay.
that feels like plenty of time from where the conversation is now to be like, okay, let's be real now.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions? Was there any public comment? Now that Paul has shared the file for a minute. Okay, let's move to item I. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
This is on for discussion approval, the info sheet for the voter-backed charter change.
So at council's January 3rd, 2023 meeting, council directed staff to prepare an information sheet to aid consistent messaging regarding a voter-initiated charter change proposal to empower, the proposal is to empower council to adopt a just cause eviction ordinance that by statute must be presented to voters on the next town meeting day ballot, meaning the charter change needs to be presented to voters. Council also requested input from the Inclusion and Belonging Commission and the Housing Commission. The feedback from the Inclusion and Belonging Commission was incorporated in the attachment. The Housing Commission consensus, and I imagine Councilor Duncan will have more to say about this, but in short, was that the second page could be seen as negative rather than neutral, and that it should not be included. So, one ask of council tonight is whether you want changes made to the information sheet, and then if so, then endorse those changes or endorse it the way it is. The other ask is to discuss whether and what education efforts you want staff to spend time and money on, including with what audiences and how. And again, for the public's reminder, I'm asking for this position for this direction for staff in public of council, so that staff activity on this ballot item is transparent and hopefully reduces the likelihood that the degree of staff effort or lack of staff effort is perceived as not being neutral when the intent is to be neutral, for staff to be neutral.
Thank you. Well, let's focus first on content. Do you want to add any Housing Commission context?
Sure, I can provide a little. The consensus is, as Elaine said, the second page in its entirety was deemed not impartial, and even the data portion, the commission discussed a little bit the numbers around evictions in the county includes, not just Winooski, and not only no cause evictions, so that eviction data put against the housing data quickly will not be it's hard to interpret that accurately without really reading into the footnotes and understanding what the data means. So they felt it wouldn't be very informative, or wouldn't be telling the picture that probably a lot of people would take from it. So the data piece also was not seen as very helpful. And I think the one other change the commission discussed was making it clear that this is a voter-backed petition and not a result of a city effort. And if that's the case, to put that on the top. The summary does say that. So I think that particular comment is kind of incorporated in the text as it is. So the Housing Commission recommendation was to just put it forward as it is, with the first page, potentially adding something a little bit more embolded to mention that. Did I miss anything, Elaine, or anything else that you would clarify? Okay.
What about, so I feel like the reason we put the programs on there was because we wanted this to be another opportunity to let people know what's available to them. Did that come up?
Yeah, the even articulating all the other stuff we're doing was seen as somewhat unbiased or somewhat biased, as in, or conflating that this is one of many efforts of the Housing Commission. So I think trying to explain that this is, of the city, the Housing Commission and Council. So the distinction between this as a voter-backed effort that the city is trying to educate people about the implications of versus, or what it means to vote on this, versus where does this fit within all of our Winooski housing work. There's definitely, we talked about that opportunity to educate and to expose is important, but then it muddies the connection between these two efforts, I guess was the takeaway. There wasn't clear direction from the commission on that. I think that's something we could talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, this, in general, not in favor of not having the entire back page was the consensus.
'Cause I had a similar thought to the mayor, and maybe it is striking some of the items under policies and programs and maybe labeling it resources. Because I still see the value in, you know, using this as an opportunity to share resources, and I'm just trying to figure out, I agree that kind of the effects definitely feel like negative, and that kind of the data almost feels like the reverse. It feels like a positive, because people might read it and be like, oh, that's how many no-cause evictions have happened, instead of it being fully understood, as you mentioned, Councilor Duncan. But I do feel like there might be some items under policies and programs that are worthwhile to keep, and maybe even listing opportunity. I mean, I was thinking too, if this is something that's going to be a web page, you could then have links to contact information, or if folks want to attend or join the Housing Commission, links to the form, items like that that are just more, if you want to engage in other ways, or something like, or again, like resources. That seems valuable to me.
I feel like we could take, you know, if we're scrapping the data, the box could be housing resources and labeled as such to kind of separate it.
Yeah.
Like, while we're on the topic of evictions, here's.
Yeah, I like
stuff.
that.
And I think the one drawback to that again is this is a communication to the public from the council and from staff, and does it conflate the two, right? Is this one more of our housing resources, or is this, and I think we would want to think carefully not only about what this would communicate to folks who might consider voting for this or against this, but also folks who would be impacted by this, both renters and landlords. And I think that's where I emerged from that discussion at the Housing Commission thinking more about the implications for that, of making it very clear that this is a fact sheet about just cause eviction charter change voting, what it means and what it'll do and what it won't do, or how the process unfolds, versus like what the city is doing about housing, right? And I think those are two things. If they're on the same pamphlet, they're both a city thing. And I think that may be a positive to somebody and it may be a negative to somebody else. And so I just think I'm imagining a landlord who, for rightly or wrongly, is really concerned about just cause eviction capacity in the community, to see the city's programs put alongside it can look like an endorsement. So I think there's that. I don't know what the right answer is, but it's a concern that I have about what this will mean or message to people about where the city stands, as the council, as the staff stands on this issue.
Yeah, and sorry.
No, you started before me.
And kind of looking at it again, I think, the policies in particular, and where I fall back is the programs. I wonder then, you're right, like on the pamphlet going out, just including the info from the front page, but then maybe having in a little box at the bottom on the web page links to other resources. So kind of balance it.
Yeah, I feel like we could just have a single link. If you're looking for housing resources, we have the Housing Resource and Initiatives page that has a lot of this stuff on it.
Yeah.
So it's really like one sentence.
That could work.
Yeah.
I also could see a second page, like a separate sheet that comes with us to events that separates that as well, with different branding potentially. It's something else to consider, so we can still have the opportunity to put out information about housing resources in the community. Like, need help now, these are things that are already here for you.
Yeah, especially the Housing Trust Fund, which I feel like we've been looking for ways to promote more too. So it feels like a good opportunity, and that can be used by landlords, homeowners, and renters. So,
we'll talk more about education outreach in a minute, but I did want to say that I brought this up with the Housing Roundtable group that I've been meeting with monthly, and so they were interested in. There was interest in, if we're having outreach opportunities, like we could share information from other agencies as well. But again, that's separate from this. So as a reminder, that group is, who's in there? The Housing Authority, School District, Champlain Housing Trust, our chair of the Housing Commission. Not you, I'm just pointing at you because you're on the commission. Someone from UVM Medical Center. You know, and they generally, oh yeah, CVOEO is usually represented. There wasn't anyone there last week. So they were generally supportive of this, and that's all I need to say, actually. They were just generally supportive of this and thought it was an opportunity to maybe get other resources out too. I'm sorry, I'm like diverting us from the question at hand.
One thing I think could be useful, I feel that like with most ballot measures, people just want to have time to process the language, because a lot of times the first time they're seeing it is when they step into the booth. So like maybe even just putting the actual language that they'll see on the ballot, take it out of legalese and put it into plain English. I think that alone helps people.
Or even just put it on the back page.
Right, yeah, yeah, I mean, somewhere on here, I just think like this
even as it is, because that's gonna have to be what they're voting on. I support the plain language, and I think I can see also staff having a hard time being like, how do you want me to wordsmith
Fair,
this?
yeah.
So I would struggle seeing the first page without any more context.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to the?
Yes, you might have seen some of my facial expressions.
I did.
Yeah, actually, we asked the city attorney, just for the warning, whether it should be shortened, and city clerk had valid a concern that it might get lost, which I think is similar to what your concern is. And his suggestion is do it in full, because there is a risk in staff, you know, shortening it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just think giving people time to read it, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, because here we talk about it, but then even the second page like doesn't actually tell you what it is. It just
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I agree, and that might both make this tool valuable for, especially valuable thinking about interpretation, but also if folks are getting this and then coming to an event, or getting it and then reaching out to their counselors, they have the question. They can be like, this part, I don't understand, could you explain that to me more? So, yeah, I like that.
I have to say, I had initially, I don't love leaving out the context of the impacts, and had initially thought about like a condensed, what I thought of as less negative version. But then I think we're able to share the impacts on city operations, but we're not also saying the potential impacts on if the thing is in place, which I think is hard to do. So I would be supportive of dropping the back content, putting the ballot language on there, and adding just one link to more information.
Yeah.
As I was looking at some of what Burlington had on their resource page, they had an FAQ. I don't know if we've gotten enough questions yet already to start populating an FAQ with some responses.
Perhaps after the hearings.
But I see value in that. It just, I mean, if one person's asking the question, I'm sure other people are thinking some of the same things. So having a supplemental document could be helpful. And I know there's struggles with staying neutral, and I still think it's better than nothing.
I thought the first half of Burlington's was neutral and the second half was not. But I think we can revisit that after.
I mean, that was entirely different. That wasn't
a
petition, an initiative. That was a council moved.
I think we can revisit that, the FAQ idea, after we have these public hearings.
I could see that being part of the general page too, if it's just a couple too, having at the bottom. And it might be that rewording some of the language we have on the back. Like, we have that written now. If there are ways we can reword it that then answer questions that come
Yeah.
up, it's a resource that we now have. So I think it's helpful to have, even if it's not what we're going to really put forward to residents.
Yeah, theirs is almost 2 pages, single spaced. But again, their process is different than ours, and we're gonna have different questions than what they were considering and addressing.
I don't know what their time frame was, but they had more staff support to answer them as well. But that's part of your next conversation about efforts.
So are we in agreement on the changes to the document?
Can I just ask-
Yeah.
Sorry, just one quick clarifying question on the arrows. There's Winooski City Council votes to move forward or stop. Law created City Council votes
Oh,
again.
yeah, it shouldn't say city council, right?
Well, I'm wondering what the second vote of the city, so if the charter is approved by the legislature and the governor, then we have that in our charter, we can vote to create an ordinance, but I don't understand, I guess I just wanted to check what the second vote was implying.
Let me,
Is it to put it to public hearing and then to approve, or?
Oh, maybe, is it that we vote to start creating ordinance and then we have to vote on the ordinance?
So we vote to initiate the process of, right, you have to conduct two public hearings and then
I looked
finalize.
at that when, one last time before we put it in there, and in the packet. And my thought about that was, you'd have to take it up, that's really the point.
Yeah.
So we've conflated it a little bit to make it hopefully more digestible. But essentially you're deciding whether or not you take it up, and I assume that you'd be voting whether or not to take it up.
I think so.
Yeah, I do agree that's confusing.
It's confusing for us. Is it confusing for others?
I mean, I'd say it's not a good sign.
I wonder if it could be, because I get what it means, but Winooski City Council votes to move forward or stop, that essentially is like we will produce an ordinance for public hearing or not. And then after public hearing, there's a final vote to adopt or not. And I wonder if we, instead of saying law created, it's just public input and final council vote. And if yes, so there's it'd say like a first Winooski Council, like on the third one is the first Winooski City Council vote and the final Winooski City Council vote, just to make it clear that there's like 2 steps in that process with additional public input. There's a lot to cram into boxes, but somehow it like...
I agree that the law created is the sticking point.
That's the
for
part
me.
that's messing me up,
Yeah.
yeah. Maybe that's what it is. If we could just get rid of law created somehow.
Public hearings
Sure.
or public input?
Public input.
I do like
and
showing that there is another step for the public before it's
public
final.
input and Winooski City Council votes again.
Yeah. I'm
If
fine with
yes,
that.
then there's just cause. Yeah.
And then, just to pose the question, there's a validation vote that's not reflected on this timeline.
I feel like that's too in the weeds.
That was my reason for not including it. I feel like it will introduce confusion but it's also part of the process, so I understand,
And maybe that
It's
needs
a-
to be added in the, I'm sorry, Elaine.
well, I in this case, it's like 5 of one, 7 of the other, you know what I mean? As opposed to 6 of one, half of something. I'm not strongly against it, is my point.
I guess not leaving out the validation vote to me leaves out a pretty significant procedural step that we are being required to follow.
We might be required to follow if there
Well,
isn't a
we are
statewide.
required.
But we would abandon it if there's a statewide
Oh,
effort on just cause. Like we wouldn't have to go through with our charter change process at that point. We could just kind of abandon,
That's true.
and we wouldn't have to have a validation vote.
I don't know about that.
I think it would depend how they wrote it, you know?
Yeah, like we may
It
not.
might be
still have
advisable for you to do it
We probably should do it no matter what, because we screwed up the thing that.
I think given the
voted on.
poor reporting in for BT Digger about what happened, I think it would behoove us to list
Yeah.
the fact that there's going to be like a procedural vote as part of the step. It could even be like a box, like the light blue box underneath voters vote on charter change may require second procedural vote, just to, because I think it is another chance to vote on the thing, but it is like doing the same step twice, and I think we could relegate that to a sub box.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Yeah, it is super confusing, but it does, if later we're telling people to vote on it again.
They're gonna be like,
Yeah.
and we can go into more detail too at like the public hearing. So here we have the basic information going out. People can be like, well, what is that little blue box?
Let's talk about the validation vote. Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that. I do think it needs to be on here. So if that seems like it's the best place, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you want to simplify the whole graphic, I think you could lump 3 and 4 together. Winooski City Council votes twice, or two rounds, or two. Winooski City Council goes through ordinance development, if yes, and votes if yes, just cause eviction, to kind of, if we get to the point of doing Winooski votes on creating an ordinance, we can explain the whole like introduction, hearing, passage, like at that point. If you wanted to collapse some boxes and reduce the complexity of the graphic, that's one thing that I think is lumpable. That there's an ordinance passage procedure for the city council if we get the charter change.
Yeah, I like the simplifying it, but I wonder if then it doesn't work as well as a timeline would be my concern.
True.
Because
Yeah.
very specifically, no specific timeline, but then the 2 months. So I think that would be my concern.
All right, I withdraw. That's a
Yeah.
good point.
Okay.
Cool.
So we want to call out that it's a voter back petition. We had the validation vote. We changed law, created a public input. We scrapped the back, put the ballot language in, add a single sentence link to our housing resources page.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Jim, second by Aurora. Before we vote, is that good? Do you have enough information?
Yes, I wouldn't mind.
I'll share this with you too.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
That piece of paper is fine.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Let's talk about outreach now. I do want to let you all know that last week I reached out to my contacts in the Somali Association and the Congolese Association, generally about this item as well as the budget, to get a conversation going there. I don't know if they're going to want to come to one of our events or if we're going to go to them, but have started that outreach. And something that I was thinking about too is, so we have these public hearings for this item, but when we do our budget presentations, we always include ballot initiatives too. So there's also 3 additional opportunities to talk about this. I believe what staff has presented here kind of aligns to some things we have done in the past. Elaine, I don't know if you or Paul want to talk through.
Well, actually what I'd like to do is raise the caution that there might, to the extent that our limited English proficiency residents are renters, the volume of education effort that is implied, not decided, implied by the types of budget quotes you requested so far, is that we would be perceived to be concentrating on a tenant education effort. And I haven't heard anything yet on landlord education effort.
I feel like we could push back against that by specifically pointing to the equity audit, that we are what this represents is the city doing equity efforts. It's not the city prioritizing, it's the city equalizing. So I don't know if that is useful, but I it feels like I both can see why people would make that argument, but I also don't think it's a good argument that should mean we do less equity work. That would be my concern. Is like, I hear that, but that doesn't mean we should do less equity work. Outreach to landlords, I guess I would let my fellow counselors weigh in with that, but I definitely feel like to meet the goals we have set out in various ways, we should do what needs to be done to get the information out in a way that is accessible to our residents, and that should be the priority.
Is there a total for the estimates here?
No, because I didn't know if you were picking and choosing from a menu or if this
Yeah.
was the full course meal.
So I would agree with Councilor Hurd that things should be additive at this point from what's on here. I think there are some additional things that we should do to notify landlord property owners. Bulk mailer, so right now it says to all addresses in Winooski. I think that needs to go to property owners, the landlords. So print and digital. So I think the fire department also has a number of emails, and that's really just labor in terms of cost. And I don't know how much a bulk mailer would add in additional costs. So I don't know what additive expense would be there, but I'd say at least in those two instances, we should add landlords, property owners as part of the outreach effort.
What would go on a bulk mailer?
Would it just be this fact sheet in mailer form?
I can answer that quickly based on what we've done in the past, Mayor Watt. If you remember, for separate initiatives like all resident voting and for bond votes, like the bond votes for Main Street Pool, what you're looking at, the cost that's associated there is a 5x5 postcard, so it is teeny tiny. If you remember, we did one for the Centennial birthday party as well. So there's no way you could get the entire fact sheet on there, but you could lead to the webpage with the QR code and get a sample there. And then the costs that are included on that page show it's really two costs. It's production for printing and then postage, which is separate. But you could summarize a high level thing on one side and then keep your links and directives on the second.
Are we considering, this is a question for us, a mailer just for this? Or do we want one for like for town meeting day? Like there's a charter change, there's a budget.
I think it should be for town meeting day.
Have we done one for town meeting day in the past? I guess would be my question.
We did during COVID.
Hmm.
And that was in lieu of mailing a ballot to every household, we did a postcard with the information.
Yeah. I just have a question about that price. Have we pursued other printing companies? Because I happen to know you can print something much bigger than that and send it to the whole town for cheap, for about that same price.
We're currently partnered with Repro, which is a Winooski-based business. We've been doing business with them for quite a few years. We get our annual reports there, so we do try to prioritize Repro because they are a Winooski business. They also print the monthly newsletter, the Winooski newsletter, so they have the system down pretty quickly, and that's the reason why we price that out that way.
And that said, I guess we could put the whole fact sheet in the newsletter.
You are, we're not, well, it would be, that newsletter would land a little bit before March
Do you have could you figure out the cost, Paul, where we're sitting here of that extra page? Or
So there'd be no added cost to us. We already fund half of that publication, so we would just send it a page to the editor.
Yeah.
Well, we can't put the public hearings in there, like, it's too late for that.
Right.
We can have the summary, website questions and info on charter changes. I think that's all I would shoot for.
So the front and back of the sheet that we just voted on,
Well, not this section, and I would say not the back, not the
not the proposed language.
ballot language.
Excuse me.
Unless we're putting the whole, like, town meeting day.
What do we do for all resident voting?
Not that.
What would be a best practice?
Also, when is the newsletter due? When is the next due date for the newsletter? Like, we're too late for February, aren't we?
Yeah.
Too late for February, so we're looking at March right now.
So that-
They're not gonna,
Content,
people aren't gonna get it in time.
right, so the content for March is due on February 9th.
Yeah, that's a good point.
As much as possible, I think it would be good to combine town meeting day general information with this. And I think even thinking about interpreted sessions, if we're gonna put interpretation dollars to something, I would love to see it be at our budget presentation and discussion of this, rather than public hearings specifically on this and leaving interpretation. And I don't know if they're already planned for interpretation so just thinking about interpretation specifically, I'd like to see that coordinated with town meeting day in general, the budget presentations. And in general, how much can we get both and not do two separate communications campaigns around this and our budget?
well, so the public hearings had to be warned for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is fine. I think some of this might fit specifically for the public hearings. I was just thinking, like, maybe we first knock off what can be done in tandem with town meeting day communications, and then what's left over that we have to do specific for this in the public hearings.
And in one of the public, do you mean in the announcement, we said the second one would have interpreters?
We haven't said anything
Okay.
because it wasn't, we didn't have direction.
I just wanted to confirm. Okay.
I was thinking the other way, like, would we be adding budget, I guess? I don't know that it matters if it's not, I mean, is that a public hearing on the budget as well? I don't know if we'd have to warn that then. Or if it's informational on the budget and the hearing on the, I don't know.
Don't want to risk it.
I guess on January 3rd, I had the impression that we were gonna have interpreters at the 4th.
That's what we did discuss.
Yeah.
A desire to do that.
That's true. Yep, that's right.
I think I'd still have that desire because I think what we talked about of having one that's in the evening with virtual access and then having one on the weekend with interpreter access feels kind of equitable in reaching different parts of the community. I think that would be my preference, is to continue with that. I do acknowledge though that there's the note that with so many languages it would be hard to hear, so that is, I'm not sure if there's a best course of action with that, or if we just build in to have those.
Does our Zoom account have features that allow translation?
No, that's, you have to hire interpreters for that. I mean, so on a technical level, yes, but, I mean, that, we're talking about the 26th, where Zoom is possible in the council chambers, and not possible, for the O'Brien Center.
Right, and I'm thinking about because this one's, the 26th will be recorded, if a language option via Zoom is something that's included in one of our paid features or not. Yes, and I also think we should have in-person interpreters for the 4th.
When we had an all resident voting info session with interpretation at the O'Brien Center. Like, it's not super smooth, but there were kind of like different groups seated together, and
Yeah.
it worked okay.
Yeah, I remember like just like planning in the pauses to ensure folks can go through the interpretation. Yeah.
I think it is a little bit challenging because for like people asking questions, but that's what we can provide right now.
Yeah, maybe a plan to like go in a circle and continue.
Making sure that you ask, like,
Yeah.
does your group have a question? Does anyone from it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. Just kind of let's starting to pick menu items. If we focus on translation into 8 languages that we can get access to locally, I guess it really only adds like $170 to do more. But we do the 8 languages, interpretation, mailer combined with town meeting day info. Pamphlets. I think we got the fact sheet. We could just print the fact sheet. So skip the pamphlets. And then I think it might be worth doing the hybrid meeting recording because that's a distributable resource afterwards on the 26th. So essentially from this list, I would say let's not do the pamphlets. And if we want to save $170, I think it's okay to do 8 as opposed to 11, though at less than ideal.
I would agree with all of that.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'm forgetting with the recording. If we're recording the one in the evening, we might be able to find ways to interpret it after the fact. I don't know if we'd want to talk about that now or see if that's a possibility.
I also have a question just before we get into that. I thought our contract for town meeting TV had one additional meeting. Does that go to the planning commission?
Paul keeps track.
It's three total meetings, yeah, so it's generally 2 council meetings and then either a planning or DRB.
We're pretty deep
We've
this
also-
month.
Yeah, we've exceeded the budget meetings, we've also exceeded that.
Right.
But specifically for having them at the O'Brien Center or not, it's a technical thing where they can't be down there, they can only be in the council chambers at City Hall.
Oh, I know about that.
Aurora, to your thing about we could have a video translated after. I might wait to see how that goes and see how productive the discussion is. There's also, we're recording our budget presentation for town meeting TV on the 10th. So we could also maybe like that's more worthwhile.
Putting it in there and having it very specific informational.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. That might be a better tactic. But again, we have it recorded, so if they're like, oh, we got it really good, these 10 minutes of explanation.
Yeah, if something really good comes out of the 26th, we can
talk about that.
Talk about using it, yeah.
That sounds good.
I mean, we also can just print these black and white at City Hall and distribute some versus like nicer pamphlets.
Mm-hmm.
Those printers are expensive. So.
We have to use them. Are there any public comments on this item?
So the only thing I don't see, I did want to kind of come back to your point, Elaine, or your observation that this is not really reaching, like we're going to rely on really passive uptake by landlords that this is happening, especially like smaller owners. I'm not thinking of like the bigger corporate property owners, the folks who own like 4 units. How they'll get access to this information, they'll find out about that on a mailer. They'll get that. That's really the only resource that's kind of actively going to them.
Well, in the email.
Yeah, can't we email them all?
Is that something that you can do? Like, that was gonna be my question: is can we use the rental registry? Is this a sufficient? I know there's desire to be judicious with how much goes out on that email list. Is this of sufficient import that the city can notify that these public hearings are coming up to that community?
I think we would be remiss if we did not.
Okay, great.
And include interpretation information on that too, right? or just the
Yeah, I
for the
mean,
meetings?
I
Yeah.
don't know that we
Never
would
mind.
message differently.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
what
the
I
same-
mean.
Same
Yeah.
communication.
Exactly. Sorry, that's what I was trying to.
Is there any channel that's missing? And I presume like another thing I wanted to ask about is frequency. So some of things are one time, so bulk mailer, that's a one-time thing. What would be an example of multiple frequency touch points?
Well, so Paula, I'm gonna put you on a spot here in a minute. Thinking of like how many times you weren't, alerted voters to all resident voting. Trying to think of what else. I mean, the fire truck you actually didn't do too much, so. Paul, do you have a record of how many times, I mean, not specifically, but roughly, we messaged about all resident voting?
Not off the top of my head, no. But, as far as things that can be duplicated, obviously your social media posts can be reshared, asking, partners to share that stuff. And those are your repeat situations that you want to do thoughtfully. You want to hammer it every day, you lose traction on that. But, so those would be those instances.
We could still include something in the newsletter as, don't forget, town meeting day, there's also this ballot item.
The listserv is not on here.
Which listserv?
The opt-in email
The
listserv.
email subscribers, it's supposed to be. I believe it was on a memo that was included elsewhere. Maybe it got checked out, but you're looking at less than 300 email subscribers there, and that would be, a general news update, same as all the other ones.
Yeah, it's in the separate memo about the communication outlets of the city in general.
Okay.
Oh, I guess kind of tied to that, do we think that the community service WhatsApp account, that's another slightly smaller context, but could be used as well?
Yeah, that's why it's on that list.
That, I assumed, I just wanted, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, again, we're not trying to advocate for even a specific outreach. We want to try and share with you all the options that you have so that you can tell us what you want.
I mean, all the regular social media pushes. I would anticipate we put everything out that way.
So the hearings are normal channels.
Yeah.
And then town meeting day in general is normal channels, and then we've identified additional expenditures for the charter change from that
So,
menu.
in terms of the info sheet, so you want that translated?
I think so, right?
Yeah.
So the quote we have is for the 2 pages, but the charter language is going to be in more, it will be more text, except you might have that quote already because it has to be in the ballot or the something that someone can look at to vote with, right?
So that's already going to be done.
1,100, yeah, for just the petition.
Okay. So that's not really included here. Like we basically lose a page of, we're cutting the pages in half for this quote. Not quite in half, but there's less content to translate.
Well, there's more,
Well, we have to
that's
translate
right,
the
yeah.
warning,
Yeah.
the ballot
Well, that's
language
right,
anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Assuming that the translations are not ready in time for the hearings, we can, I think if we did, whatever the communication is that goes out around like town meeting day, which would include this ballot item, like that can include here's how to access the thing that we do that says like to see this in Nepali or whatever the different languages are.
Yeah.
And I would also just share directly with some folks that I know that in certain languages. Because I also put things out in English in my circles, so it is not a specific targeted thing, but yeah, I guess what I'm trying to articulate is not going to be ready by Thursday, for sure. And if it's not ready by Saturday, we can still push out this information. It's worthwhile to translate because we can still get it to partners. Okay. So it sounds like from the list of added costs, we're going to pay for the hybrid access, translation of the flyer into 8 languages, a bulk mailer for town meeting day and just cause eviction. Those are the additional expenses. And then we're also asking for the rental registry email.
And the interpretation.
Oh, and interpretation. Yeah, thank you.
Bulk mailer to all addresses in Winooski and all property owners in Winooski. Because some of them might not live in Winooski.
Sadly.
I know, they're missing out.
Were we doing the mailer to them or just the email to the property?
Both.
Both? Do we want to not do the mailer, seeing as the email is free?
The bulk mailer, it automatically, per the system at the United States Postal Service, just gets mailed to every address automatically, so.
Right, but Paul, it doesn't include all the property owners that own in Winooski but don't live in Winooski, is that correct?
Say that again?
If a property owner does not live in Winooski, do they get the bulk mailings?
Oh, right. No, not through the local system. No.
It's just the zip code, basically, right?
Right.
They also don't get to vote on the petition.
Yeah.
So
I feel like email's
inclined-
enough.
I think email's enough for that.
I think it would be a lot of, I don't know this. The legwork to put together those addresses and mail them would be significantly more than just the zip code based one.
Yeah.
And, and if we have an email that they provided us, that we should assume that that is a way of contact.
You're having thoughts?
Well, just for your information, not advocating for or against, but Eric, our JS property tax map, does that include mailing addresses for owners? That's how it was set up in my other town, so.
It has address information for the owner at the time. The grand list would have all your information.
I'm sorry?
The grand list would have all that information.
It does, okay. So putting that together is not, it's not the expense, it's the mailing itself.
Sorry, I thought we had just decided on the email. I guess I just don't see a reason what, if we had every Winooski resident's email, I would say let's just do that. Like, let's cut down expenses where we can.
I think it's an appropriate cost savings measure for this one, personally.
I agree, since they can't vote on it.
Yeah.
They can find out and make comment, of course.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm backing you up quite a bit now, but after Christine, you gave the list, or you added something and I didn't get it.
Oh,
The interpretation.
The interpretation for,
Saturday?
yeah, the Saturday.
And then, this is a level of detail, which is a little weird to be asking you, but you said 8 languages, which
As proposed, I think, in the item.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was 9.
It's 8.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you why I'm asking, and again, I'm not advocating for or against, just point of information. So I'm not sure where the 8 came from, but the school district does an annual survey of their language communities, and it's currently at 11.
It looks like
it used to be 9, which is how that number came about. So
I know that some of those languages are not written languages, though. Is that included in the 11, or is it more including the non-written languages?
Paul, do you have that off the top of your head?
I do not. I think the intention was to include the currently updated list that the school district uses. I have to go over that again. But I mean, that's basically what we would do, right? Just mirror the current list that the school district has.
My understanding is that the AALV only has 8 of the 11 languages. And we
Oh,
can get
that's
11.
That's what's included
That's
here.
what's here.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm assuming that's where the 8 interpreted languages came from, as well as that
Okay.
AALV has 8 interpreted
Thank you for
languages.
reminding me of that. So there's 2 options there for the interpretation I wanted to ask for clarification on. So if we use Language Link, it could support more. However, they would not be providing in-person interpreters. So it's 2 different strategies, basically. One is you have all the languages in writing, and then you have interpreters that are looking at potentially somebody else's, translation to interpret with. Interpret being the in-person activity, translation is the written activity. So, or you could get fewer languages, but have potentially the, people who are even more familiar with the content.
I would lean towards the latter.
Fewer languages and
Yeah, because there's an opportunity for deeper understanding.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I think what was proposed on here has 2 options for translation, only 1 option for interpretation. And I think I would also lean to the interpretation in person, but I could see, especially if maybe this, I guess it depends if we're only translating, well, we're translating both sides, but primarily for this case, the first side, would that $2,000 be decreased from Language Link? Because what was provided, was one from AALV, which was 8 languages, and one from Language Link, which was 11 languages, and a slight difference in cost.
And just to add to that consideration, Paul, I feel like you've told me before that it might take ALV a little longer to turn around a translation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, on a case-by-case basis. There's just no way to estimate for that. Sometimes it's longer. I think for written translations, Language Link is, they're a huge company, and we've had really good success in turning that stuff around really quickly. So you could go Language Link for that whole list, and then for AALB for interpreters. I mean, provided that they even have the capacity and the staff to do it. I don't know that we can guarantee that at this stage either, but.
Okay.
I guess one thing I think about is just kind of like a customer service standpoint. If we translate it into languages that we're not gonna have people for at the hearing, are we just setting a bunch of people up for failure?
Well, if the information sheet doesn't go out until after, I think it should be fine. Yeah.
I thought about that too, but being able to read it and not get follow-up is better than nothing.
Sure.
I wanted to support the local entity, but given capacity and timeline concerns,
Is the ballot going to be translated into 11?
that's a good question. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
let's just do that.
Done.
Let's see, so. Saturday. So hybrid access to February 26th. Translation into 11 languages from the school. Bulk mailer for town meeting day and just cause eviction. Interpretation for Saturday, February 4th from ALB in an email to the public building registry owners.
Yes,
Is that everything?
yes.
Yes.
Think so?
Okay.
Someone want a motion approving that?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, thank you. Let's move on to our last item then. This is on for discussion, approval of the city manager review process. So per contract, the city council will perform an annual performance evaluation of the manager. I realize we did this not that many months ago for Elaine's probationary period. However, I want to get us back into this February cycle because it works well with, for example, we're about to have turnover on the council. Wouldn't want someone evaluating it just a couple months in. So what I have recommended here is the same process we followed before. And I am hoping to identify a volunteer to distribute the survey this year.
I can volunteer to do that.
That's fantastic. I think you would just need to get access from Paul, is that right?
So is that one? Okay.
And I'm happy to chat with you.
Okay,
about any of
perfect.
it too.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it was a survey we all filled out. I'll do the right one this time.
We'll just make it more clear. We'll simplify it. Council only.
And then I have the timeline here, so this says it would be distributed tomorrow. This week is fine. I don't know what I was thinking. And then if we have our responses in by end of month, then we have if we get it by the 2nd, we have time before the 6th to review and have a chat with Elaine. Any questions about that? Okay. If that all sounds good, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. I had warned the executive session just in case. We don't really need it though. So this brings us to the, sorry, for clarity. The executive session was just in case we wanted to talk about the evaluation process in greater detail. We clearly don't need that, so we can forego that item, which brings us to the end of tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all.